This is a journey of grief. A journey that who would have ever thought that I was going to have to take in my life? And this journey is not a straight path. There's no straight path. It's a dang on roller coaster some days. It's curvy. It's got its own rules.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Trace of Burnout. I'm Dan.
And I'm Roger.
And this is our third Memorial Day episode.
Three
That's
years.
Right.
That's right.
Veterans Day is important because it honors the service of all veterans. But Memorial Day is important because it honors the service and the sacrifice of those who gave their all for their country and the families and loved ones that they left behind.
That's right. The last 2 years, we've done episodes featuring an Army widow, a Marine Corps mother and brother. So this year, we'll be showcasing a Air Force Explosive Ordnance Disposal Gold Star mother, Mrs. Christina Kazakavage.
Christina, thank you so much for joining us here. We really appreciate you being part of our Memorial Day episode this year. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention that your husband, Jim, is also here. But we're just primarily going to be talking to you because he's had enough of his time on camera.
So
Fair enough.
So he says.
I'll leave him alone.
But we'll begin the same way we always do. Does your family have a history of service?
Yes, a long history. Actually, going all the way back to the American Revolution.
Wow.
It never. I mean, I grew up with it, with who was in the service and what they did, and but it didn't hit home really with me until my father was talking to our KO officer, and I overheard the conversation, and he had said to him, had a member in our family all the way back to the American Revolution, and my grandson's the only one that fell on the battlefield. And that hit hard for me.
Yeah.
That he would think about that.
Yeah.
With everything that he had been through in his years of service, that I grew up watching him be a part of.
What did he do?
And he was a Marine. Wish I could tell you what his MOS was. It was never really anything that he discussed with any of us, and never really thought, sadly, never thought to talk with him about it. But he was phenomenal in what he loved to do. He loved being a Marine. He lived it, breathed it, ate it.
As they do.
To the day he died. I mean, seriously. He was part of his Marine Corps League for years and stayed very active with that, and had actually 2 generals that he stayed in contact with all the time. They come and visit him once a week or something and have lunch, and he was Marine for life.
Do you think that family history of service was a contributing factor to why your son joined?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we were just reminiscing about that the other night. St. Patrick's Day was 28 years ago. St. Patrick's Day is when Adam enlisted.
Yeah.
And I can remember when he came home, and we had a foster son at that time, and both of them had come home, and they said, "Mom, we got to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And these are 2 boys that just never got into trouble. I mean, it was just not in either one of them to get into trouble. So I really didn't pick up on that vibe that this was something that, And I said, "Okay, what's going on?" And I was in the kitchen cooking supper, and he said, "Mom, no, you're going to want to sit down." No.
Where's this going?
I'm good. No, Mom, seriously, you're going to want to sit down. So I grabbed the kitchen chair, I sat down, and I stood back up. I said, "That's all you're getting." I said, "What? You better come forward. What is it? What's going on?" And his favorite phrase for everything was, "eh." He was like, "eh." And I said, "eh, what's going on? And he said, we enlisted in the Air Force today. And I was like, all right. And he was like, well, he said, we went down there to the recruiting station, and he said, went over there to talk to the Marine Corps guy. And he said, he was too busy to talk to me. He told me to have a seat. He would be with me in a little while. We went and took a seat. He said, the man got up, walked out, don't know where he went. I said, well, that's not professional. He said, I walked by the Navy recruiter, and I was like, nope, I don't do that. And so he said, I went to the Air Force recruiter, and they said, what can we do for you today? And
Nice.
he said, that was what it was, Mom. And I said, okay.
That is funny, because it's a recurring theme we have on the show of people's fates will go one direction or the other based off of that interaction or
Right.
not
Yeah.
Right.
with the recruiter. Like,
Yeah.
I was going to go be a Marine, but yeah, they stepped out for lunch. And so here I am 35 years later after being in the fill in the blank.
Right. And he was
Yeah.
like, I know that. I know one grandpa was Air Force, the other grandpa was Marine. And he said, I was doing that. Well, I was doing the weighing. And
Yeah.
he said, but no.
That's funny.
He said,
What was your reaction? I mean, he had asked you to sit down.
right.
Obviously, he was expecting one reaction.
I'm not sure what he thought. My reaction was, that was not something we ever really discussed. But this was something he'd already done. And it was interesting because he did throw into my face. Because I had always told my children, there were times where, they would say, Mom, what am I going to do in my life? What are we going to do? What do you want for us to do? Do you want us to go to college? What do you want? And Adam and I would have these conversations. Do you want me to go to college? What do you... look, y'all, you got to go and decide what you want to do because it's your life. Mm-hmm. I'm not always going to be here. I'm not going to. And if you can't decide on what you're going to do in your own life, you're not going to be happy.
Right.
Don't do it to make me happy. You got to do it to make you happy and make sure that you're fulfilling what you want to do in your life. And so he proceeded to say those words back to me. And so I ate them. And I was like, yeah, sure. Those are the words you remember. Not the ones pick up your socks off the floor in your room, but that's okay, I got it. And so he's like, okay. He said, well, I leave for Lackland in 3 weeks. And I said, all right, well, there's a lot to get done before that because I remember. And so.
Were you surprised at all?
Surprised. I don't know that I want to say surprised, really.
Okay. Would you say you were surprised that it was the Air Force?
No. Again, Jim's dad was in the Air Force, and I can remember there were many times where he had a lot of conversations with Papa Joe about what he did in the Air Force. Papa Joe would reminisce, not so kindly, to a certain extent. He was Air Force. Papa Joe was Air Force. He started out being a fighter pilot. And then the Air Force found out that he was a nuclear engineer by trade, by skill, by training. And they sent him to Groton, Connecticut to work on nuclear slopes. And he was like, I'm Air Force, I'm not Navy. But he ended up his career in designing nuclear subs. And he loved designing. He did that.
Just as a curiosity, did he remain in the Air Force while he was doing that?
Yes, he sure did.
So they didn't
Nope.
branch him or anything like that?
Nope.
That is so interesting.
We're talking around the time, this
That's
1950s, Korea War time, or who knows how the military...
The Cold War.
Yeah, who knows how the military really worked back then? I don't, but I know that, he stayed into the Air Force, and yeah.
Did he take pride in being one of the only people in the world that was in the Air Force that would do things that were below sea level?
He loved it. He could talk to you about submarines to the, oh my gosh, and he tried his best. He took Adam all the time, going in and touring different submarines, and there was just no way. I'd go down 3 or 4 steps, and I'm like, I know you're all on your own. I'll see you up deck. I just couldn't do it, but
I'm there with you on that.
yeah,
no thanks.
And I think Adam was pretty much the same. He didn't want anything to do with water. They'd go fishing. That's about as much he'd love to do on water, but don't ask him to do much about anything else.
What year was it that Adam enlisted?
1999.
1999.
Yeah, 1999 is when he enlisted.
Pre 9/11.
Yes.
Did he, when he enlisted, did he know what he wanted to do, or did he enlist as just needs of the Air Force?
While he was at basic, I can't say for sure, because I wasn't there at basic. Can't say for sure that he knew what he wanted to do. He never discussed it with me. There was nothing in letters home.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they're allowed to write. You know.
Yeah, and I mean this is before Al Gore's internet really took off.
Right.
So
Right. And so you know,
Jeez.
I mean I just remembering I know how Paris Island is. Those boys can't say anything in letters home to Mama. I don't know if the Air Force is that tight either, but he never really discussed it with me. Graduation at Lackland was quite different. Had one of his, I think it was a drill sergeant, I don't know, I just know it was a ranking officer that came over and said, well, you ought to be really proud of your son. And I said, well, yeah, always have been, thanks. And he said, no, really, you should really be proud of your son. And I was like, okay.
If you say so.
Always have been, but thank you. And I caught out of the corner of my eye my son going like this. Like. And with Adam, growing up, this child, anytime that he would get upset or get worried or get embarrassed, the tips of his ears would get red. And that was my telltale
That was
sign.
the tell. There you go.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, your ears. And he's like, and he would cover it. And he's like, no, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing. And I said, no, obviously, because he's made a big deal of it. What is it? He's like, And he goes, again. And he says, I've chosen EOD. And I was like, okay. And he made a statement to me that I reflect on a lot. And in the past 16 years since he's been gone, I've had to learn to heal from this. But in that conversation, he was like, Mom, it's no big deal. It's going to be great. And besides, he said, it's the highest paid job in the military. And I turned on him. And I said, of course it is, you idiot. It's because they don't expect you to live. And they don't expect you to survive. And after he died, after he was killed, it hit me one night.
Yeah.
Of sitting there in the dark and literally getting on my knees and asking for forgiveness, because that's something I've had to live with and heal from, because I don't know, we never discussed it beyond that of what I had said, so I don't know how he internalized that in the 13 years that he did serve, 13 years and doing EOD work.
Yeah.
But I will say that we were very fortunate with most of the bases that he was at. We would go and visit, and there were 3 bases, I think, that had actually given us permission to go downrange. So I had a very clear understanding of what my son did, and what his team did, and I'm forever thankful for that. Because I have seen other Gold Star families that have no idea. No idea what their son or daughter did in the military. None. And I sit there and I think, oh, he showed me. His own hands showed me what he did. And each and every time we saw that, I was just, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. But I clearly understood. Adam was a mathematician. He loved math, loved calculus. Oh my gosh, if this boy could just eat and do math, he'd be fun. That was his world, and so I understood it in that EOD work. That's a focused, skilled calculus job. Yeah. And so I thought, okay, he's hit his niche. He's in his world, and I got it. And so be very fortunate of having been able to watch him at his skill.
Please explain. Us in this room know what EOD is, but please explain what it is.
It's explosive ordnance disposal. They defuse bombs. They defuse IEDs. That's the core of what they do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Did he ever say why he chose that?
You know, because he said he needed something to challenge, and I got that because that was something he always needed. Always, even when he was in school, most especially high school, I'd get letters or calls from his teachers all the time. First 2-3 days of school, he would have read all of his textbooks, and then his teachers would be calling me, going, "Wait, we don't know what to do with him because he's acting bored. He doesn't want to, you know." And I'm like, "You're gonna have to challenge him. You're just gonna have to find something to challenge him to do. I can't do your work for you." And so that was Adam. He was always looking for the next challenge, and EOD did that. I could see it. EOD in it, and and it's interesting because Lieutenant Colonel Bloomer at the time, he was stationed in Aviano, Italy, and had come to see us. And one of the things he asked me was that, "Did Adam bring home stray animals?" I thought that was a strange question, you know. But yes, turtles were his favorite. He would fill my bathtub with turtles, or sometimes he would find some wood ducks or whatever. But that was about the gist of it. I mean, he never found cats or dogs or anything, but turtles were his favorite. But so yes, why do you ask? And he says, because he's always bringing stray airmen home. And I was, what? Okay. And he said, he's phenomenal. He said, I've watched him. He will take a young airman under his wing. He said, it doesn't matter what the kid's MOS is. He said, he just like tones in or whatever, and he just radars in on that young airman. And he'll go outside of his parameter, not during his duty hours, but he'll take that kid and say, come on, we got to go on a hike or whatever. And that kid has come back stronger and is ready to do his job. And he said, I've seen this countless times with Adam. And he said, it just really astounds me. I was like, yeah, that's about him.
Yeah.
That's how we got our foster son. Seriously, he brought him home one day. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. He brought him home one day, and the kid ended up staying with us for 4 years. So.
Did they go to basic together?
Yes, they did.
They did. Okay.
They did go to basic together, but they chose different career paths. And Mike went on to be a aircraft mechanic, and which was fine because just where his academic level was in school, it fit him. It was, and it really did, because he was always very mechanically inclined. And but Mike only lasted 6 years in the Air Force, and he and Adam had a falling out about that. Adam wanted him to make it a career. Adam had planned on being a career airman, and Mike didn't want that, and they had a falling out, which was very sad. And they sadly never got themselves back together.
No, that's too bad.
So on the day of Adam's funeral, actually his visitation, Mike showed up at the house and stayed with us for another 2-3 months after that. And he's got a career with NASCAR. He works on the NASCAR crew.
Wow.
And which I'm very proud of. But yeah.
So take us to the events of Adam's passing.
Well, the events. So, like I had said before, Adam loved education. He was all about learning, but it wasn't just important to him, for him to learn. He wanted others to learn. He thought very hard on his little sister. I wish she was here to tell you that, but it was very. He loved education. So in his time in 13 years. He had earned 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree while he was in the service. And he had told his sister, he said, you better make something of yourself too. But he loved education. And on this particular day, he had apparently come in from one of the missions, and there had been a mission that there had been a school that had been laced with explosives, and they needed an EOD team to go out to go see if this was true, because this was one of the schools that our Army built.
Is this Iraq or Afghanistan?
Afghanistan.
Okay.
That was from my understanding from what they had told us, was that it was one of the schools. However, it was a school.
Sure.
So he said, I'll go. And that didn't surprise me, because again, it's a school. And I do remember on some of our conversations on Skype, and whoever invented Skype ought to get accolades forever for that, because you could actually talk to and see
Oh, yeah.
your loved one.
Deployments.
Yeah, you know,
For
I
sure.
mean, and that was great. And so it was important. He was like, Mom, he said, it's phenomenal. He said, we got some schools here. We got them built. There's women and children going to school. And that was important to him, because this was something that wasn't happening before. And so it didn't surprise me. So I was told that he was the first to raise his hand and said, I'm going on the mission. He was the NCO on that mission. They were tied to a Army infantry unit, because of course that's what would happen when an EOD unit would go out. Either Army infantry would go out or Marine Corps would go out.
For the security.
For the security reasons, to watch their backs, because if they have to defuse something, they can't watch their backs. Mm-hmm. And so they had gotten to a point where they had to dismount out of their vehicles to walk up to the school. He was walking with the Army captain, and his other guys were behind him. And as they approached the school was detonated. We were told all the children and the teachers were killed inside the school. Adam and Captain Penna were the only 2 servicemen in the team that were killed. There were 5 other guys that were critically injured. And the other ones were injured, but not critically or seriously enough to take them out of service. So that was what we were told.
What year was this?
2010, January 19th.
10. Okay. So what was the notification process like on y'all's end?
Well, interesting you want to bring that up too. So let me back it up if I could. On all of Adam's deployments, agreements were that we could go to the
going away ceremony.
whatever I can't remember what they call it.
Deployment ceremonies, yeah.
Right, okay. With the agreement that you can't cry. No crying allowed. If you cry one time, you can't do it again. Can't come? Okay. And so I had to make these agreements, and I did really well. I mean, this was his 5th deployment, so the other 4, I did very well. I'm serious. I mean, never had the urge to cry. I was proud of what he was doing. You're going to be home. He had a good idea, 8 months, 9 months. He had, and so okay, we'll do good. And so one of the other things that Adam and I loved to do was always exchange books. He loved American history. That was his, and I love it too. So if I found a good book, I'd send it over there, and here you go, give you some reading, and whatever. So we were always doing that. So I'd more generally have 4 or 5 books to send with him as he's going to the plane to put in his sack. And this last deployment, we were all standing there, and he starts hugging us, and he comes down to me, and he starts hugging me, and I can still feel that hug, and I can still feel his cheek against mine. And he said, Mom, I left a book on your pillow, and I want you to promise me that you will read it. And I said, well, I've always read your books, but okay, sure. And I could still feel him, and he was still hugging me. And he said, no, promise me you will read this book. And I mean, he's right here, and I'm just, yep, okay, and, just hugging, And I said, okay, I'm going to read the book. And he backs me up, and he has my shoulders, and we're eye to eye. And he said, Mom, promise me you'll read that book. And I said, fine, I'll read the book. What do you want, a dang report card or a book report when I'm done? And he's like, you're not taking this seriously. And I said, I'm taking it seriously. Well, why? Like justifying my acts to my own children, child. And he said, promise me. And I said, okay, I promise. Now, and then he goes and he's hugging Daddy, and then he gets to Sissy, his sister, and they're hugging and they're talking, and I always let them have their time, because they were very, very close. And I look at my daughter, and I can see a teardrop start coming out of her eye, and I remember the promise, and I'm like, looking at her like, and she's wiping, and he looks at her, and he says, and he just goes, and I've always just been this way. Watching any of my children cry makes me cry for whatever reason. So I have to look away. I mean, I'm trying to get her, and I'm looking away and trying to compose myself. And he said, Mom, promise me. And I said, promises. And he's looking at me, and he started walking away, and it was the very first time in any of the deployments, I could not control myself. I looked at him, and I started crying. And his back was to me, but I started crying. And all of a sudden, he turned around, and I'm like, quickly, wiping the tears. And he's looking at me, and he's, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. And he's, and I was like, I'm so sorry. And on this particular deployment, they had them going up a ramp, a moving ramp, escalator kind of thing. And he got there, and I couldn't stop crying. And I saw his face, and I was like, I felt so bad, and I'm sorry, I love you, And we just stood there for the longest time. And I looked at Jim, and I looked at Sarah, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. So we got to the truck, and I was sitting in the truck, and we're heading back to the house, and I'm like, wait a minute. He's never left a book on my pillow before. It's always been on the stand next to the couch where I sit, or on the coffee table. So I said, and I looked at Jim. I said, we need to get home. So I get home, and I rush and run to the bedroom, and I grab the book, and the book is Final Salute. And I read that, and it was written by a Marine who had been a KO officer to 7 families. And he had gotten permission from those 7 families to write about his experience of being a KO officer with each of the families. And I get it, because every family is different. But I read that book until about 2, 3 in the morning.
That night?
That night.
Yeah.
I couldn't put it down. And I cried all the way through it. And I went and I woke my husband up. And I said, he's not coming home. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, Adam's not coming home. And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm telling you, he's not coming home. And so when the day came, of all the days, my father had come, my husband had at that time owned automotive mechanic shop. And my father had been in charge of the Young Marines, the capital city Young Marines, and he had bought them a van to be able to go and do their service work. And he usually had somebody else bring the van to Jim to do service work on it, maintenance work. And this particular day, he brought it, which was very uncharacteristic of my father. But my husband calls me, and he said, your father's here at the shop with the Marine Corps van, and he wants you to take him to lunch. And I said, okay. I'm glad he passed that on to you, not just Didn't call me, but okay. I said, I'll be there to pick him up in a minute. So I went down and we were having lunch at one of his favorite places. And while we were sitting there, we were just about done with lunch. And Jim had called me and he said, you need to get back to the shop now. And I said, well, Daddy and I are almost done. We're fixing to leave. And he said, no, you need to get here to the shop now. There's people that are here to see you. Now, understand, falling a little bit, I had been a police officer. I was a law enforcement officer. And it would not be uncharacteristic of one of the deputies to come by the shop just to come and shoot the breeze because I'm off that day and whatever, So I'm thinking this is just one of my guys, whatever.
Maybe a prank too.
Yeah,
something.
exactly. More or less like that. They would put Jim up to that, And he said, I'll get there. And he said, no, honey, please, you have got to get here. I said, Jim, what is going on? And he said, I can't tell you, honey. I just need you here. And I said, all right. Well, Daddy could hear over here on the phone. And he said, what's going on? I said, something's going on at the shop, Daddy. I don't know. But we've got to go. And he said, okay. And so we got in the car and we get to the shop. And I see an Air Force car. Now, understand, not that Adam ever made it home from a deployment early. TD-wise, yes. But that's what the first thing that went through my mind. He made it home.
Maybe it was a surprise.
Yeah, and I got all excited. I said, oh, he's home. And I remember my dad grabbing my arm. And he said, it's going to be okay. And I said, of course it's going to be okay. He's home. And again, he grabbed hold of my arm. And really super tight. And he said, honey, it's going to be okay. And I said, I know, Daddy, let go. And I flew out of the car. And I ran in there. And there were 3 of them. And I looked at them. And I was like, yeah, no. You don't have anything to say to me that I need to hear. So y'all can just go on now.
They're in their blues.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They really, and that's how I knew.
Yeah.
And I saw the chaplain. My eyes went right to there. Totally, I hate to say it, but totally discreet. My dad picked up on it, but I didn't. There were 2 lieutenant colonels that were there. And I walked out of my husband's shop, and I was just, my hands were in the air, and I was like, nope, they're not saying nothing to me. Nope, not talking to me. And I started walking around my husband's shop, and I must have done, 2-3 laps.
The outside?
Of the outside.
The outside, okay, yeah.
Because every time I'd come back to the door, they were still there.
Yeah.
And so I'd go on my next lap. And finally my dad came out, and he just grabbed hold of me again. And the Marine came out of my dad. And he had a hold of my shoulders, and he looked at me, and he said, they've got a job to do. And it was the first time in my life I had ever talked back to my daddy. Ever. Because I remember looking at him straight in the eye, and I said, good, they can tell you. And he said, that's not how it works, darling. And I can remember looking at him, and I said, I can't do it. And he had a hold of me, and he looked at all 3, and he said, do you know where their house is? And one of them spoke up and said, yes, sir. And I figured, yeah, they've already talked to Dad. They're already yes-sirring him. And I know I'm laughing at that, but you just have to understand my dad, And he said, okay, you can all go to the house. We'll get her there. And they did. They left. And we stood there, and I just kept, and he had a hold of me, and he said, honey, we got to go. And he looked at Jim, and Jim had said, I can remember Jim looking at my dad, and he said, I just talked to him. I just talked to him yesterday. And I was, at that instant, and I know this sounds terrible, but I was mad. I was angry at him because he hadn't told me about that conversation, that he got to talk to him. And I turned on him. And I said, what do you mean you talked to him yesterday? He's like, it's okay. He's talking about buying an old car because he had already bought a 48 Ford that he and Daddy were restoring. And he said, he's talking about, he's looking at it, he wants me to go look at it. And he wants, so, and I was mad. I was just mad. And my dad said, look, we got to get to the house. I said, no, we're not going to go. And he said, honey. And I looked at my dad, and I looked at Jim, and I hit the floor of the shop. And I screamed out, he's gone. He's gone. My baby's gone. And Jim picked me up off the floor, and they got me in the car. I don't know how. I don't remember. And we got to the house, and we went inside. And that's when you hear, they want you to sit down and everything. And I think it was, I can remember clearly where we were sitting, and my dad was right there, and Jim was right here, and Chaplain was right like where you're sitting, and the 2 lieutenant colonels, and it was one of them that spoke up. She had a white piece of paper in her hand, and she said, we regret to inform you. And I just put my hand up, and she said it again, and I hit my living room floor, and I just kept saying, stop, stop, and she couldn't stop. She was reading, but I kind of like the Peanuts cartoon. Do you remember the teacher going, wah, wah, wah?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what else she had said. I really couldn't. And she finally stopped talking, and my dad reached down and he took a hold of my hand, and all of a sudden I got up and I thought about my daughter. She was working at a bank in the next town over, and I said, oh my God, we gotta go get Sarah. I gotta go get Sarah. Well, yeah, no, they're not gonna let you leave the house. No, you can't leave. You can get somebody else, but you can't, and I kept saying, oh, we gotta go. I gotta go. I gotta go pick her up. I gotta go take care of her. That was my next concern. I mean, it was just like, I hate to say it like this, but the waterworks stopped. My next concern was to get my daughter. And all of a sudden, a deputy that I worked with and was good friends of ours walked into my house. I could see him walking through my kitchen and walking through my dining room. And I was like, oh my gosh. And he stood there and he was like, what's going on, darling? And so we told him, and he came over and he was hugging me. And I quickly backed him up and I said, you got to go get Sarah. You got to go get her. And he said, where's she at, darling? And I told him what bank she was at. I said, but you got to go and get her, but you cannot tell her anything about Adam. Don't tell her a thing. Just tell her there's been an accident and that she needs to get home. Didn't think that one clearly. Yeah. But I told him I told Billy, I said, please, go and get her. And so unbeknownst to me, but I had been told later, because of our jurisdictions, and he was a sheriff's deputy and she was working in a town. It's just hard to explain municipalities and how deputies work and everything. So, but he got up with the town chief, explained who he was, explained who we were, and why he needed help from some of his police officers. They agreed. They sent 2 officers in, told her manager that she needed to go home, that there was an accident at home and she needed to proceed to go home. So, of course, she gathered up her things. She kept asking the officers, what's going on, what's going on? They said, we don't know. We don't know.
Couldn't tell you if we
We can't tell, we don't know. We've just been told that there's been an accident and that you need to go home. And so she gets to her vehicle, whatever, and they get her to the line, and Billy is there, and she sees Billy, and she knows Billy, and she jumps out, and Billy just says, there's been an accident, darling. And like I said, I didn't think this one through. She thought it was me. She's like, something's happened to Mom. Tell me. She's been shot. She's been hurt. She's been what? He said, honey, we just got to get home, which infuriated her even more. But Billy, bless his heart, he followed her home to make sure she would get home safely. And about in that whole time that it took for this to happen to get her to the house, the media gets wind. And I walk outside the house because I can hear her truck coming up. Our driveway was about 3/10 of a mile long. We live out on a farm. And we live way down a dirt road. I mean, we're talking way out in the middle of nowhere. We're out in the middle of nowhere. And I step outside of my house, and there's yellow police tape all over. And I'm looking around, and I knew the police chief, and I was like, "What? I'm sorry. What? I'm going to be honest. What the hell?"
Yeah.
Because the time that I've been in the house, you've taped off my property. What is going on? And he said, and the police chief came over to me. Nelson came over to me, and he said, "Darling," he said, "take a look." And down my dirt road and down my dirt driveway, there are all these news vans. And he said, "If I don't put that yellow tape up, they're going to be at the front door." And he said, "That's up to you, but I ain't taking that tape down until you tell me." And I was like, "What are they here for?" And he said, "Well, because your son has been killed." And I said, "What is it to them? Why do they care?" And he said, and everybody just calls me Mama. I've just been to Mama so many people. And he said, "Mama, I can't tell you. It's just what we do. We're protecting you." And I said, "Okay." And I see Sarah coming over, and she's grabbing hold of me, and she's like, "Mom, what's going on?" 'Cause she's like freaking out. She can see I'm fine.
She's had all this time to
try
think about what.
right?
Catastrophize.
Yeah.
Right.
And then she shows up, and there's press all over the place, and yellow
press
police tape. Yeah.
But she also sees the Air Force car. And unfortunately, all three of them have come out. We're out on the side of our yard. And I looked at her, and I just kept looking at her face. And I said, "Honey, Adam's been killed. He's gone." And she fell to the ground, and we both fell to the ground. And she just cried. I was like, and they picked us up. I could feel people picking us up. And they were trying to get us into the house. And in the course of people trying to get us into the house, I've got stairs going up on a porch. Sarah fell off the porch. We don't know. But she fell off the porch. She broke her leg.
Ooh. Jeez.
Okay.
When it rains, it pours.
Right. And so I'm jumping off the porch. I'm down there with her. And Billy is down there with her. I mean, we've got a deputy there. We got a police officer there. And I hear Nelson. And I looked at Nelson. I said, get EMS. And I hear him on the radio. And he says, he tells dispatch, he said, "We need EMS here. But do not come in with lights and siren. The family has had a death in the family. Do not, I express, do not come in lights and siren. Come in quiet." Yeah, they don't listen.
You had one job.
Right? And not only does EMS come, but 2 fire engines. I'm like, I've worked in emergency services for years, and I know the impact of things like this.
Yeah.
But I see them all coming up, and they're all rushing up, and I'm helping putting her on the gurney, and I'm going in the back of the ambulance, and I hear, "Oh no, you can't leave." I'm like, this is not going well with me.
Right.
But Nelson grabs me, and he says, it's okay. We'll get an officer to go with her. And he said, "I'll go." "How's that, Mama?" "I'll go." And I said, "Okay, fine." So he goes, which is probably the best thing that could have happened, was to have a police chief with her, because apparently he blasted through the ER and told the doctors and nurses her brother's been killed in Afghanistan. She gets priority treatment. We got to get her back home. And he never, from what I understand, he never left her side. But he got her home when, it was actually about 4 hours later. But yeah, in that time, the driveway was full, and the dirt road was full. And I can remember looking outside, and there were a bunch of motorcycles out there. And they had put up so many American flags. We've got a horse ranch, okay, horse farm. And so my front pasture is along my driveway and the roadway, and they had that both sides of the driveway and along the roadway of the pasture, just flags. And I remember standing there thinking, how beautiful is that? And I looked at Jim and I said, why did they do that? And there was another guy there that we knew, and he came up behind me and he said, they love you, Mom. Love you. And I saw a guy coming up our walkway that's been a friend of our family for years. And I grew up with a wonderful grandmother, but I could always remember her saying, you know that your loved one is truly gone when the first dish comes to your home. And here comes this man that we had loved forever, and he's got a dish in his hand. And a screen door went open. It's like, nope, you ain't bringing that in my house, darling.
No
Sorry.
casseroles. No casseroles.
And I can literally see Brian's face to this day. He's just standing there with this casserole that his wife had made, and his poor face was like, what? You know,
Yeah.
like, but, and he's like, no, you can take no. And he's like, I'm sorry. And I mean, this grown man. And Jim is blowing by me. And Papa Tony's blowing by, and they're right there. Like, come on. And that was the first dish that arrived into the house. And it tore me.
Yeah.
It tore me. Because everything Grandma had said, you know.
That's a very chaotic day.
Yeah, very much so. And it just seemed like those Air Force people weren't going away. You know, I can remember sitting there thinking, I was sitting at my dining room table and literally looking at them, and they were conversing with my dad quite well. And just thinking, are you leaving? You know, are you leaving? And my house is filling up with more people. And people that I knew and people that I didn't, you know. And I remember looking at my kitchen door, because that's more the in and out door than my front door. And there was this huge wreath of flowers hanging off of my door, you know, with ribbons and everything on it. And, you know, and again, I just get, well, word travels fast.
Yeah.
You know. And, yeah, and then I got a phone call, and Lieutenant Colonel came over, and she said, you need to take this phone call. And so I answered it, and it was our KO officer. And he was introducing himself and telling us that we would be flying out for Dover and what time they would have us at the airport. And I was just like, all right.
Pretty numb to it at this point.
Yeah, you know, why are we going to Dover? You know, why am I getting on a plane? You know, those kinds of things. But these are questions going through my head. I'm not asking. But yeah. So it was, yes, a very chaotic day. And then they invited the media in because they were just hounding. And I can remember...
Still there at the house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the chief came in and he said, Mom, if you take at least one or two, and then we can walk out there and say, hey, family, you know, calling it, we can push them away. But he said, usually, you know, if they can get you to at least talk to one. And I said, all right, whatever, you know. And first guy came in, and I can clearly remember him. He was from Channel 11. Remember him? And but I couldn't remember. I can't really tell you the words that he was saying, but I looked at him and I said, "You can get out. You can leave."
Was he insensitive?
Yeah, I mean, it was just, it was overpowering. Tell us about Adam. Who is Adam? We see that, and this was the big one. We see that Adam's last name is different than yours. And I think that was the one. I said, yeah, and what's it to you? And he said, can you explain that? And I said, no, I'm not going to explain that to you.
Yeah.
I don't need to. And he was like, well, we're just trying to put the pieces together. And I said, they're not your pieces to put together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, well, there's some other questions. And I said, no.
I think we're done here.
You need to leave. And Billy was the one that escorted him out. He said, Mama said you need to leave. And the next guy that came in was from WRAL. I remember his first name was Bo. Can't remember his last name. But he sat down, and he said, may I call you Christina? And I said, sure, for right now. And he said, no. He said, ma'am, he said, I don't want to be here asking insensitive questions. And he said, if you'd like to tell us about your son Adam, he said, I'd love for you to do that. He said, but I know that this has been a harrowing day for you. And he said, in all honesty, I would rather not interview you today, if that's okay. Can we just sit here, and can you show me pictures of Adam and tell me who he was? And I thought, wow. There was no cameras. There were nothing. And I did have one picture that I had of Adam that I had already brought out, that I had on my dining room table, and I said, well, this is him. And then we proceeded to go through and look at a lot of his other things that were personal to him. But yeah, he stayed there for about an hour, probably even longer. I don't know. I didn't time it. But,
yeah. That's how it's done.
Yeah. And I let him come back. He came back.
For something more formal.
It's for something more formal. And actually they came, I think it was like a day or two after we had come back from Dover. So, yeah, and then Channel 11, whatever that is, WTVD, they managed to show themselves back up at my mom and dad's house. My mom and dad lived in Cary. And they actually showed up there at the house the day that we were supposed to pick out Adam's resting place, which was chaotic in itself. So, when you go to Dover, let's go back to that. When you go to Dover, they told me that that's where Adam's body was going to come home. We were going to Dover to see Adam's body come home. And we get there, and there's airmen all over the place. We are on the plane, and the pilot announces that there is a family of a fallen that needs to deplane first. Please stay in your seats. We're going to let this family deplane first. Our poor daughter's got a broken leg, so they send in 2 airmen to come get my daughter first, which she's very indignant about. She's like, there's 2 airmen trying to pick me up. Not her idea of being picked up, okay? So, but they get her off of the plane, and there's a wheelchair. They've got a wheelchair for her, so she's even more indignant. But there are people that are on the plane. They're clapping, which I found somewhat obtrusive, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, well, what are you clapping for?
It's probably just a nervous
Of not knowing.
A nervous
I'm not
reaction.
knowing what to do.
Yeah.
And who does? I mean, but sitting in silence probably would have been all the better. But anyway, they get us off, and we're going through the ramp. And as we get off of that ramp, there are a lot of airmen and servicemen. I can't say that they were all airmen, but we're literally encircled, and then there's long lines of them. And they're like really in close with us. And I'm just almost to the point where, back off kind of thing. There have been 2 generals that walked up, introduced themselves, couldn't tell you who they were now except that they were generals. And they were walking on either side of me, and I was wanting to walk with my daughter. Okay, that's just... But they positioned themselves on either side of me. And there were airmen around my daughter. There were airmen around my husband. We were almost like separated a little bit. And I didn't understand why. And I finally, we're halfway through. And I just stopped. And I said, stop. What is going on? Why are we being escorted like this? And he said, what? I guess it was a general. I don't know. And I felt my KO there, but they were like, Mom, we got to move along because there are people that are not sympathetic to the fallen in this airport. They're protesting. And we got to, for your safety, for your family's safety. And I was like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Bring them on. Because they don't know this, Mama. And they're like, no, we need to go. And they're shoveling us through.
Dan and I lived through the Westboro Baptist nonsense.
Yeah, and that's what I found was what they were protecting us from, and hence all the motorcycles at our house and whatnot.
Yep.
So they get us to this hotel because the Fisher House had not been done yet.
Mm-hmm.
They had just broken ground on the Fisher House. And so they get us to this hotel and asking if we want food and water, and quite honestly, to tell you, I mean, I hadn't had anything to eat. I was living on coffee. I can tell you that much. I was living on coffee. So, yeah, give me a cup of coffee. I only had 4 or 5 cups on my plane. But sure, give me another cup of coffee. I'm good. And they're scrambling. They're sending these young airmen. I can tell they're young airmen by the little stripes,
Little mosquito wings.
Yes, And they're jumping to the orders, as they should. And then we were sitting, and I know there was conversation, but I couldn't tell you what the conversation was. I mean, I just, somebody told me we were here because my son's body was coming home. When are we doing that?
Yeah.
And there was just like nothing being said. And finally they all stood up, and so we stood up. I said, all right, we're going to take you to your rooms now so that you can get freshened up. And I'm like, oh, all right, no. And we all shove into this little elevator, and get up on the 4th, 5th floor, whatever. And we get out, and we get in front of this room, and this young airman opens it up. And our KO officer and I guess one of the generals, they're like, wait here. And I'm like, okay, and they walk in, and they walk around, and they come back out, and they said, okay, ma'am, you need to come in and check your room. All right, so I walk in, and yeah, bed, bath, we're good, And he said, all right, we're going to go and check your daughter's room out. And I said, whoa, wait. Have you not noticed she's got a broken leg? And yes, ma'am. And her room was like down the hall and across from us. And I was like, no. She needs to stay in, there's 2 beds, and in case she needs to get out of the bed, she needs Mama at night. And they were like, oh. Right?
Yeah.
And so they sent this key card with this airman, and they said, go return this to the front desk, tell them we're not going to need that room, and hustle and come on back. And so he takes off, and we're just like all standing around in this hallway. And our luggage is still outside the door.
Yeah. Somebody didn't do their homework.
Right. And I'm just like this. I'm looking at the KO officer. I'm looking at the general. I'm like, door's open, you know. And my daughter really needs to get in. She needs to sit down, you know, because we don't have her in a wheelchair right now. And she was on her crutches, but she was fine. And if I said anything, she would have clubbed me. But I knew she needed to sit down.
Yeah.
I knew. And so I said, yeah, you can stay in the hallway if you want to. I said, come on, darling. And I walked her in there, and I got her seated. And the next thing I know is that then they said, we'll need you to be downstairs in 20 minutes. Wait. I thought you said you were taking us to our rooms to relax, to rest, to freshen up, that kind of thing. I didn't know I was already on a timetable. Okay. Why do we need 20 minutes? Where are we going? You just need to meet us all downstairs. Okay. Okay. So we do that. We get downstairs. And there's 2 young airmen outside our door. Okay, and our KO officer. And we walk out the door, and I see 2 airmen out there. And I said, guard duty? And they're like, yes, ma'am. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. You know, I'm just, we don't need to be that flagrant in the hotel.
Dog and pony show.
Or just whatever,
Yeah.
you know? I appreciate the fact that you think that you're doing something good, maybe. I don't know. But I don't need Jack and Jill down the hall seeing 2 airmen standing outside a door all night, and we don't need that. We just don't need that. But we get downstairs, and they take us to the dining room, and they want me to eat. Have you not heard? My son has been killed. And y'all said that you brought me here to see his body come home. And nobody said anything about when that's going to happen. And they said, the plane isn't landing. We're getting a timetable on that. They called it Angel 1.
Yep.
Angel 1 is not landed yet. But we want you to enjoy your dinner. Enjoy. Yeah, there's that word. But thank you. And our KO officer, Jim Brewster, wonderful man. We're still friends with him and his family. We're very, very tight, very close. But at that time, we were just getting to know each other, and he was just very protective. He was EOD himself. He was a master sergeant at the time. Yeah, at that time he was a master sergeant, and so he's very good at pushing people away from me. And I was just, give me another cup of coffee. And my daughter was like, Mom, why don't they just bring you the whole pot, and you can just drink out of that, okay? But at that point, she was like, Mom, literally, if you do not eat, I'm going to, because she could start seeing me. I'm like,
Getting the coffee shakes.
yeah, and she knew, But anyway, so we get through that, and now it's time for us to go to the mortuary.
Can we take a quick break and then discuss when we get back?
So you're at Dover for the dignified transfer. And after a little bit of mucking about, it's finally time to go and see Adam.
Oh.
Or so you think.
Oh, no. We go to the mortuary.
Okay.
The National Mortuary. Where I had this lady in fatigues. Can't tell you. I don't know what branch. Was not paying attention. My mind's focused on one thing.
Sure.
Again, surrounded by what seemed like 100 airmen. I remember General Reno being like right on my side and constantly. Yeah. But I wasn't paying attention. I'm just being honest. And she comes running over, and she just not much taller than me, and she just throws her arms around me and is hugging me, and she's. I'm from Georgia, or some southern place, and us southern girls just have to stick together, and I'm just, and I'm just, kind of hugging her. If you have any questions, you come and find me, okay? Okay. And I do remember she was a major, and then they pulled her away, And I was like, excuse me, wait, who was she? All I got was that she was commanding person there at the mortuary.
Okay.
So that's all I got out of that. We get in there, and again, like I said, I'm surrounded. Do you need anything? If you're not going to get me coffee, I don't need. I just felt like it wasn't that I needed the coffee. It was just, there's just something about it that's, I don't know about you, but it's very calming. But we were sitting there, and we get taken into this conference room, and it's just me, Sarah, and Jim, and our KO officer at a somewhat square table, not very long, but the three of us are on this side. Our KO officer's at that end, and these two ladies come in and they sit down and they've got folders. And they said that they're representatives of the mortuary and that they're here to talk to me. And there's paperwork that needs to be done before we can go to the flight line. Okay, so this is the first I've heard about flight line. Okay, now you're getting a little closer.
Now you got my attention.
Yeah. And the one lady, she opens up her folder and she slides this thing across the table to me and she said, you need to pick one of these. And I said, pick what? And she said, you need to pick one of these. And I said, pick what? And she looks at me and she's like, you need to pick either this one or this one of these. And I said, what is it? And she's looking at me, rightfully so, probably, like I was a darn idiot. But she said, you need to pick a casket out, either this one or this one, for your son, for when for his body to go in, because when he comes off the plane, he'll be in a transfer box. Okay, well, but it was just the way and I said, and I'm looking at it, and I said, no, it's not my job. I'm not supposed to pick out my son's casket.
Yeah.
That's not my job. And she, I mean, the table was probably about that way. And she, you need to pick out one. And I mean, she's like, really, I was like, no.
Pushy to say the least.
Right, yeah, I mean, she was just rude.
Yeah.
Okay. But I looked at her, and I was looking at the pictures. It still wasn't registering what I was looking at, in all honesty. And she said, you need to pick out one. And I said, no, I'm not doing it. And our KO officer reaches down and he slides it to himself. And he said, we'll deal with this. Keep moving. Move on. And so the next paperwork is, okay, we understand that he's not to be buried at Arlington. What are your plans? And I was like, I kind of looked at Jim. My KO is Jim. And I was like, wow, that was fast. Because when we left for Dover at Raleigh-Durham Airport, my father wanted to come see us off, bless his heart. And an airman drove him separately so that he could do that and get my dad home. Because my dad could not travel with us. And but the last thing my dad said before we left was, bring him home. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, bring him home. He needs to come home. And I said, okay. And so I thought, wow, then that needs to travel fast, because she already knows that Arlington's out, right? And I said, I don't know. I guess the National Cemetery at home. And she said, all right, well, we'll get back with your KO officer and let you know whether it's open or closed. But you need to sign here that he's going to go back to North Carolina. Okay. Sign. Okay. Next paper she puts across to me is, okay, when he is released from the National Mortuary, of course, that didn't register quite at that moment, but it did. She said, you need to sign here, he'll be landing at Fort Bragg. And I said, no. He'll go to Seymour Johnson. He was Air Force. And she said, no, he'll go to Fort Bragg. And I said, no, He served in the United States Air Force. He wore a United States Air Force uniform. He's going to land on a United States Air Force tarmac base. And there's one right there. It's called Seymour Johnson. And she said, no, ma'am, you need to sign the paper, and it's going to be at Fort Bragg. And I said, darling, let me see your pencil. And she gives me her pen. And I flipped that piece of paper over, and I drew North Carolina. And I said, here's my house. And I said, here's Fort Bragg, and here's Seymour Johnson. And just for your general information from now on, I said, here's Camp Lejeune down here. I've lived there my entire life. Don't tell me where these bases are. I said, I am in proximity, dead center, between Seymour and Fort Bragg. And I said, by golly, he is not coming home, Fort Bragg. If I've got to drive that dang horse myself, I will drive it back to North Carolina. And so again, my KO officer says, hang on just a minute, we need to take a break. And so he...
Get another cup of coffee.
Right? He gets up, he walks out, and he comes back in, and he said, the 2 Air Force generals that are out there are going to be signing off. Adam is clear to land at Seymour.
Boom.
And so he came over, he wrote Seymour, I had to initial it, and he took the paper, did not give it back to her. Then it was just the next piece of paper. You need to sign an initial. We don't know the condition of Adam's body when he comes back. Given that he was EOD, should there be any body parts that are not with him, what would you like done with them if we find them? Okay. Here's your options. You can, if there, when there are remains that are found over there, arms, legs, whatever, they are shipped back to Dover. Okay. They are DNA tested to any of our fallen. Your choices are, they can be interred with Adam wherever he's interred, or you can have them, there's a section in Arlington Cemetery that is specifically dedicated to the remains of fallen that family members have either not conclusively or they're not here
It's
anymore.
unclaimed.
It's unclaimed, whatever. But there's a place at Arlington. Or you can choose to leave them in Afghanistan and they will be disposed of. And I said, well, wait a second. What do you mean disposed of? Put in the trash. I mean, you said the word, not me. Well, they'll be disposed of. There you go again. What does that mean? Are you throwing them in the trash and waste management is coming and putting them in some landfill? What are you doing with it? Well, I don't know for sure. And I said, well, let's just make this easy, okay? I said, and I'm looking at it, and my daughter, who had clarity of mind, bless her heart, she seriously did, but she was like, Mom, think about it. Think about it. This would be Adam. He knows he's going home to North Carolina, but he knows some of his buddies are in Arlington. So if they find something of him, let him go with some of his buddies in Arlington. And I said, all right, is that what you want me to do? And she said, yeah. And I said, all right. So I initialed it, but then I passed it over to her, and I said, here, you initial it. And the lady said, no, we don't need her initial. And I said, this was her idea. This was her plan. This is her brother. She was... And so Sarah was initialing while I'm arguing with this lady. So we get done with that. You know, in all honesty, it was... The paperwork was like this.
Yeah. Between
signatures and whatnot. And again, my daughter with clarity of mind, that I love her to death because she keeps me grounded. And she had actually been looking at that picture the whole time. And she said, Mom, take a look. I need you to take a look. She said, now if you look at this one, it looks blue. It looks like it's Air Force blue. Don't you think that would be good for Adam? And I said, I think you're right. Do you want that one? And she said, yeah, I want that one. I said, then you sign off on it. And I let her sign off on it, and then I signed underneath her. I figured she's sitting there. She's thinking about her brother. She's internalizing this grief of hers, but she's also helping making plans for him because she knew she had conversations with him, and so, you know, if finally I was just like, are we done? Are we done? Can we go to the tarmac? Well, we just got word the plane's not landing until 10:30. And we're like only at 6:30. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? This is just, you know, and so I said, well, I got to get out of this room. I've got to get out. And we left, and another general had come over. I don't know, remember his name. I wish I did. All I remember is he was god awfully tall. I mean, tall and lanky.
It's a requirement for generals to be at least 6
gosh,
feet tall.
I remember just looking up, and I know I'm short and I have to look up at everybody, but, you know, I was just like, you know. And he said, ma'am, can I just talk to you for a second? And I said, sure. And we were in the mortuary lounge area. And he had said, well, I understand that your family is Catholic. And I said, yeah. And I said, Adam's practicing Catholic. And he said, would you like a Catholic priest? And I said, you know, sure, you know. And he said, well, we're working on that for you. And I said, you know. And he said, I understand there was some turmoil in the other room with the ladies. And I said, well, that's what you want to call it?
Yes. Turmoil.
Tumult.
And he said, would you like to share with me? And I said, don't ever let those two ladies ever deal with another Gold Star family. That's what I'm going to tell you. And he said, that bad? And I said, yeah, that bad. I said, I was ready to come across that table. And I was ready to rip her to pieces. And I said, it was just, yeah, that bad. I said, now look, I get it. Y'all need this paperwork done. I get it. But there's ways of doing it. And how she did it and how both of them did it
was the wrong way.
Yeah. And so he's like, okay, thank you for that. We go back out, we're sitting, and these two ladies come over, and they've got the general and they've got somebody else, and obviously they were told to apologize. And I said, no. I said, I accept your apology, but I clearly have made it said, and take my words for this, people. These two do not deal with another Gold Star family.
We're done here. Yeah.
They've ruined whatever career they've got right here today. And they huffed off, you know, whatever. And I sat down, and this Catholic priest came in and met with our family. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking over, and I see this woman sitting on a couch. And she's crying. And while these people are talking to me, and this priest is talking to me, and I finally called my KO over, and I said, who is that? And he says, that's Captain Penna's mom. And I said, well, where's all of her Army people? I've got all my Air Force people here. Where are her Army generals and Army people to comfort her? Where's her KO? Oh, he's over there. Her KO is standing over there. She's sitting on that couch. Oh, where's her family? She doesn't have any. This was her only child. She lost her husband a couple of years ago. Are you kidding me? So I get up, and I walked over, and I sat down next to her, and I told her who I was. And I took her hand, and I said, we'll cry together. We'll be together, okay? I said, you don't need to do this by yourself. And I looked at the priest. I said, how come? She's Catholic too. How about coming over and praying with her? And he come down, and he was like standing in front of her and blessed her and all of this. And I looked at her KO, and I said, you're shameful. Downright shameful. And he said, ma'am. I said, you're the only thing that they sent for this woman. I said, I've got my Air Force family. Do you see all those people right there? That is Air Force family. who I don't know or have never met before, I know today. And they're here to comfort me. And you're it. You're it. And so, I mean, it was a long night, and we finally got taken out on the tarmac. We were told that Angel 1 has landed. And we get out there on the tarmac, and that same major comes over, bless her heart. She comes over and she comes down. She's standing behind me. Mind you, we have no president, vice president, senators. We have no Washington, D.C. And quite frankly, I was all right with it. I was okay with it. I mean, not that it needed to be pointed out to me, but it was. And that this was not something that he does. Okay, whatever, I don't care. It's not something he does.
Probably better off anyway.
It's fine, you know. A senator can't come out. I don't care. Will you just get on with what we're doing here? And this major puts her arms around me from behind, okay, and she whispers in my ear. Not so much a whisper. She talks in my ear, and she says to me, "He's in the transfer box up there." Because in this plane, they did not come off the back end. They came off the side. And there was a platform that went up. And Captain Penna was at the end of the platform here. And Adam's transfer box was half in the plane, half off. And there was a man in uniform that was up there next to Adam. And she said, "Just know that he's in that transfer box." Really? That's what you want to say to me? Seriously? Does that make you feel better? Okay.
Probably nervous.
But then say nothing at all.
Yeah,
you know?
agreed.
I mean, if you're going to do that job, you should have, and if you're a major and you're in charge, you should have enough training under your belt to know what to say to a family member and what not to. I mean, there are boundaries. There should be boundaries. Say nothing at all. That'd be the best boundary. Just say my condolences to you. Thank you for your son's service. Enough said. I'm good. But we're standing there and we're watching this man. And he kneels down next to Adam's transfer box. And he's there for a couple of minutes. And then he bent over and he kissed it. Kissed the flag, and he stood up. And he saluted. And one of the generals standing there looked at me and he said, "That's Brigadier General," I don't remember his name, but apparently he was at Germany. He knew Adam. He had served with Adam. He had met Adam's body when it came to Ramstead, because that was the stopping point. And he had decided to escort Adam home. And at that point, because he said, "Wow," he said, "that Brigadier General flew all the way from Germany to be with your son." He said, "What an honor." And that touched me. And then all of a sudden, he turned, he was sideways, and he called out an order. Couldn't tell you what it was. I don't know. But he called out an order. And what I would call the guard.
The honor guard?
The honor guard. Okay, at that point, I don't know. But okay, yes. To come back up on the platform. And he talked to them, and they had picked up Adam's transfer box, and they carried it down and put it side by side with Captain Penna. And the general said, "Wow." So that's not supposed to happen, because it's supposed to be ranking officer at the end, come off first, NCO stays behind. And he said, "What an honor." He's put him on equal plane with Captain Penna. So I take it from his mom, and I just gave her another hug, and I said, "They're still together. Look at that, they're together." And they brought him down, and they were both brought off. There was Army Honor Guard, there was Air Force, they were both brought off. course, Captain Penna was put on first, and then Adam. And this Major, once again, that's not a bread box. That's not a bread truck. I'm glad you told me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, but I remember, the other thing I remember is that all the lights were off on Dover Airfield. There was not a light on. And they had said that was per the orders. There was no planes to take off, none to land. I remember turning around. I was looking for Jim for some reason because, of course, they surround you and we get separated. And there was a Black Hawk helicopter that was like right behind us. They were just like right there. I remember looking at Jim and I was like, turn around, there's a Black Hawk, because he likes looking at helicopters and planes, And he turned around and he was like, wow. And those guys came over, and they thank you for your son's service, and that meant more to me than the people standing there. It really did. They took their time. They didn't know my son, but they took their time because they understood the service. Like you said before, when it's not a dog and pony show, when it's true honor, that's when you know.
You can tell.
You can.
Yeah. Everybody else has to be there. They didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can tell.
And, well, did they, or did they just get stuck because they couldn't take off?
Well, they could have just stayed right where they were.
And that's true. And they didn't. So, yeah, so it is chaotic. But then I was told after that it would take 2 to 3 days, tops, before Adam's body would come home. Because I had agreed to an autopsy. I had family that tore me up about that, signing off on the autopsy, and I said, I have to, because that's what's going to protect the next EOD. If they can tell by the extent of his injuries or whatever, can make the next great bomb suit, then yes.
Yeah.
Okay? That's why I did what I did. And Daddy was pretty much like, leave her alone. To his mother, leave her alone. And so we finally my KO came to the house, and he came inside, and he said, they're releasing Adam's body. He's going to be flown home to Seymour tomorrow. He will land at 3 p.m. So we'll make sure, and he's going on, we'll be sure to get you down there at what time, going blah, 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 going through what he's got to go through, And I wanted to make sure that Daddy was with us. I mean, it just, to me at that point, I had just really, in those couple of days, realized that while Daddy was so much a Marine to us in so many ways, and growing up, stiff, hard, I didn't get a whole lot of love out of my dad. There was no hugging in our family. If you had to cry, you better go somewhere else and do it, kind of thing. And sometimes he gave us time limit. And in all honesty, Daddy and I had a conversation about that, because when I had hit the floor at his auto shop and I hit my own living room floor in front of my dad, when I made eye contact with my dad, I shut my tears off. And it wasn't until like 2-3 nights later that I was sitting in Daddy's house, and he said, why? Why are you not crying like you should? And I said, because you taught me not to. My whole life. You taught us kids not to. And he looked right at me, and that was the first time I'd ever really seen my dad cry. And I said, I'm so sorry I did that to you, because this is the time you need to cleanse your heart.
Yeah.
And to watch my dad cry, where I'd never seen that before. I never even saw that when his own dad passed away, And so we had a good moment then. So I realized that night before we went to Seymour that God had done something phenomenal to me in all of this. This is a blessing. And I want to say it's a blessing that my son was killed. But in that action, something else happened. I got to see my dad. I got to know my dad like I'd never seen or known him before in my life. And so I had said to Jim, I said, can we make sure Daddy goes with us? I mean, Carrie's 30 minutes away from my house. It's not a problem. We'll get an airman up there. You know, and he got to the point he had Dad on his cell phone. So he called. And my dad was also Jim. I have enough Jims in my family. In my life, trust me. And he said, Jim, we'll be at your house, you know, sometime, blah, 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 tomorrow, get you. Adam's body's coming home. Get you down here to Christy's house, and we'll leave here. And so that day came, and that next morning, and my driveway, my dirt road, is loaded with motorcycles.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And the Air Force van is there.
Yep.
And we get loaded into that, and we start heading out. And as we're heading out, those are not the only motorcycles. I mean, all the way to Seymour, it's like more and more are joining in. And we get down to Seymour, and there's more at Seymour, to the point where I hear my dad saying, good Lord, how many of them are there? And I said, I don't know, Dad, but that's a lot. And he's like, yeah. I was like, wow, you know. And we didn't get the idea or the logistics of what was happening with that. You know, it was just wow to us. And we get to the flight line, and quite a few of the EOD guys were there, and EOD guys that I knew. Like I said, over the 13 years, I was blessed to be known as Mom to so many of them. I was Mom. And I love that, because they came home. They came home with Adam.
Yeah. My
home was their home, and they knew that. And so it was good to see a lot of them. They were there, and it just seemed like a terminal wait, you know. And we finally get taken outside, and we watched the airplane land. And Adam's casket came off, and then we were told that his best friend at the time, Tech Sergeant Stephen Kopic, was with him. He flew home with him. And we didn't know that until he came out. And I had known Stephen. I know his wife. And we're just, you know, family. And it gives you a sense of comfort, completeness.
Yeah.
That everything is going to be okay. You know?
We have each other.
And I started walking out on the tarmac as I was starting to move him towards the hearse. And I got stopped. And it really made me mad. And they were holding me back. And they were getting him over to the hearse. And I was getting even more mad because I wanted to go to him. And it was what I wanted to do. And everybody's holding me back. And then this airman, it wasn't Jim, I don't even know who it was, but he puts my arm in his arm, you know, clasped together, and I thought we're going over there. Instead, they take me over to a limo, and they put me in the limo, and I had a moment in that limo where I was just really clenched fist, and I was screaming, "Get me out of here!" You know, and it seemed like nobody was listening, that kind of thing. And so the trip back to Fuquay-Varina, because we had used a funeral home there. It was closest to the church. And Daddy bless his heart again. He's in the limo with us. And we're leaving the base, and there's signs up all over the place. People holding signs up. Oh, God bless Tech Sergeant Adam Ginnet. Thank you for your service. And we were told that the base had been shut down. Base commander had shut the base down. Nobody was to be working. Nobody was to be doing anything. And, I mean, it was emphasized that the base was shut down. And that they were ordered to come out along the streets. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't until we passed the elementary school and I saw the little kids out there with their little flags in their hands. And I just, to me, seeing those little faces. And I said to Daddy, I looked at Daddy and I said, do you think any of them will be airmen? He said, maybe a Marine or two.
Of course he would say that.
Right. Right. And he would do that to make, this was a laughable moment, let's lighten up a little bit. But and they were like those digital signs that are all over bases,
Yeah.
And you're familiar with them, but they were all of them said, thank you for your service, Tech Sergeant Adam Ginnet, fallen hero, and it had all of that. And and the amount of motorcycles that were getting in front of us just astounded me. And they were going through Goldsboro from the base. And the amount of people in Goldsboro on either side of the streets and some in the medians, I was overwhelmed with the amount of people that I was seeing with flags and everything, and that it just turned out. And so, we can only go so fast, right? And they tried to get on I-70, and we finally got on I-70, and I just kept seeing these motorcycles, and then we'd get through a little bit, but there were a lot of people that were out on I-70, and I'm used to going down I-70 to Goldsboro because we go to a feed mill down there for my horse feed, and I've never seen people on I-70. People don't stand, and I was like, wow. I said, Daddy, look, and he's like, yeah, and he said, what are these crazy motorcyclists doing? I said, I don't know. Well, Jim Brewster said they're stopping traffic for us. They're traffic control. Okay, that made kind of sense, And so we're going through towns and towns and towns, the people that have turned out, just phenomenal to me. And we get to our town, Andrew, North Carolina.
Andrew.
And there ain't a soul out there. One cop, directing traffic. Even the flag at the town hall's not put at half-mast. All the other flags to the towns, these are just, I know you probably think I'm crazy for having noticed these things, but you're looking out a car window, and I'm trying to put my mind in the fact that there's a hearse in front of me with my son's body in it. I'm trying not to be the meltdown, chaotic woman that I probably could have been, should have been, but I had not been raised to do so. And I looked at Jim and I was like, wow. But I also remember hitting McGee's Crossroads. And about that time, you have to understand, it's now taken us almost 2 hours to get from Seymour, and we're only at McGee's Crossroads. And my daddy says out loud, he said, I didn't know that Fuquay Arena was 2 hours away from Seymour. And Jim Brewster says, it is today, sir. And he says, well, I reckon so. And I know I laugh at it now, but these kind of conversations that you remember happening in this car, And my dad figuring things out like that. Like, who's keeping track of time? I'm not, Except that I do know that it's getting darker out. That much I have noticed.
It's still January, right?
And it's still January.
So it's getting dark early. And...
Right, but it's, figuring that his plane landed at 3. I think we got off base at 4:30. But yeah, we're like really pitch black now by the time, we hit Fuquay. And the people even in Fuquay, wow, lining the street up to the funeral home. And we pull in, and this is a laughable moment for right now. But it wasn't at this one moment.
That's how that works sometimes.
Right? So we're standing there. They get us out of the limo. They've opened the back of the hearse, and we're standing there. And we're standing there. And we're standing there. For what it seems like forever. And finally, there's this man who comes in front of me, and he's in a motorcycle vest, and he introduces himself to me as Old Bill Jammer, and he's shaking my hand, and he says, "I'm retired Air Force, can I give you a hug?" And I'm sure, gives me this hug, and he backs up, and he said, "Ma'am," he said, we can't figure this out, but the contingency of airmen who were supposed to, the honor guard to come take Adam off, failed to come with us for whatever reason." He said, "We don't know." He said, "So, if you don't mind," he said, "I have veterans here that would be honored to take Adam off." And I said, "Okay, sure." And so there are these motorcycle veterans, in their vests, and they're on both sides, and they're doing their thing. And in all honesty, I'm standing there, and I've got Sarah next to me, and I said, "Oh, Lord, your brother is just laughing right now. He's being carried by motorcycle people." I mean, just, and she's like, "Mom, really?" And I was like, "Well, it's..." And these motorcycle guys, I can't say enough.
It was authentic.
Oh my gosh, these true veterans, you know what I'm saying? And I know I was not their first rodeo, because this is 2010. They've been escorting Gold Star families since the outbreak. So I know I wasn't their first rodeo. But they got us in there and left us alone for quite a while, and it's probably the best thing I could have done, because that was my first and actual time to be there with him.
Yeah, because to this point you've just been ushered around on a conveyor belt, go here, stand here, do this, don't do this, do this, but now at least you're starting to get close to some of the peace.
And that was the first time I was able to touch. So we were told by the mortuary that I could have an open casket, but that he had a cloth over his face. They did not, at that time, they did not tell me extent of injuries or anything. They just didn't. They just said, but he has a cloth over his face. So I didn't even really get to say anything. And I will growl at him, because it was both him and my father that made the decision. His casket stays closed. But that was the first time I got to touch it. And that was my first place where my tears fell for a long time, to the point where I could hear my dad telling somebody that it's time for them to get me off of there, And the funeral director there was just wonderful. He had shown us the room where Adam would be moved to, and he, you come anytime you want to. You call me, I don't care. It's midnight, you want to come sit? So you call me, here's my cell phone. We'll come down here, we'll open the doors, you know. That kind of thing, which is great. So the next day, what's the next day? Day before the visitation. It was the day before the visitation. I had been there a couple of times, gone back and forth from home. It astounded me, the lines of people that were standing in line and signing the book and visiting my son. I was just, wow, you know. Each time that I was going, it didn't matter what time I was going, because there was several times I'd go and they'd finally take me somewhere to eat, and I'd go back, and it was just like this for 2 days. It was like this for 2 days. I just basically lived there and had enough mascara on that American flag to last a lifetime. But so the night before the visitation, one of the young girls that had served with Adam, and I had a house full of EODs. I had a house full of people, but I had a house full of EOD guys, and she came over. Her name was Lisa, and she's on the floor, and she says, "Mama, I gotta ask you a very important question." I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, you know, Adam's been in that funeral home for 2 days now, and going on 3." And I said, "Yeah. And none of us has sent him off the way he would want to be sent off." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Mama, come on." She said, "We'd like to go in there, you know. We'd like to do it our way, but we need your permission." And I said, "Oh, okay." It clicked into my head. I said, "How do you plan on getting the stuff in there?" You know, because I'm figuring there's still lines of people.
There's a way.
But
There's a
you
way.
know, but the
That's
mama
right.
side of me is, you know,
Oh, yeah.
what is your plan? And she brings out this big Gucci bag and she opens it up and she's showing me what's inside. And I said, "Okay, fine." I said, "But I've got to go with you." And she said, "Okay, good. We want you and Sarah and Dad to come." So we all pile in the trucks and we go up. And Jim Brewster was at the house. And so Jim puts a phone call into Stephen. Stephen has sat with Adam since his body's been in the... He's slept there. He's been sleeping on the floor in there with him. He's not left Adam. He didn't want to. And I was very blessed with that, knowing he was not alone in there. Seriously, because I probably wouldn't have gone home myself. And so he puts a phone call in to Stephen saying, "We're coming. Family needs a long time with some of Adam's friends, but please know that we're coming." So they met us when we got there. We go in. The funeral director sees me and he's coming down, and Stephen says, "Excuse me, sir, it's going to be family and just a few friends. Just for a little while. Please don't let any of the public come in." And there's the pocket doors, and he closes the pocket doors. And so we go up to Adam's casket, and I said, "All right, what do you want to do?" And I had made sure none of them were in uniform. Just, you know, my years of service to knowing you should not be in uniform drinking. And so everybody gets out a beer, and they all pop, and they place their caps. But Stephen and Jim both had folded the American flag because we didn't want the bear caps on top of the American flag. And they decided they wanted to do it one at a time. And so we started at the far right. And I'm sharing this with So there's stories being shared. And all of a sudden, the sliding doors come open, and the funeral director comes in. And Stephen, is, beelining, "Family only, family and friends only, please." And he said, "Well, we do have a lot of people in line, and they do close the funeral home. There are hours, And Stephen said, "I'm sorry, but this is family time. They can, come back before visitation tomorrow isn't until such and such a time. They'll have plenty of time. But we thank them for coming." And he's trying to push them out and slide the door. And no sooner gets up there, and the doors open again. And there's this man that walks in, and he's plain clothes. Well, and I'm ready for Stephen to jump on this, except that I look, and I see all my EOD guys with their beers behind their backs, and they're all saluting. And I'm like, what? So I put my beer under my armpit. I'm like, I don't know what to do, And this guy walks up to me, and he says, you're Adam's mom? And I was like, yeah, good deduction, And he says, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bloomer. And I said, well, nice to meet you. And he said, well, I knew you were Adam's mom because he had showed me pictures of you, and I just knew right away. And I said, okay. And I am the flight wing commander at Aviano, Italy Air Base, which was Adam's last base. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, you flew all the way? He said, well, yeah. He said, by golly. And I said, by golly, what? I said, you've got hundreds of airmen on that base. Why would you come to say goodbye to my son? He said, let me tell you about your son. And I said, okay. And it was just the way he did it. And he said, I want to share a particular incident with you if I could. And I said, okay. And he said, this is how I got to know your son. He said, great EOD tech. He said, but there was an incident on our base on a particular day that I wasn't sure that I wanted to kiss him or wanted to kill him. And I was like, okay. And he said, we had gotten a high-level alert on our base that there were several explosives on the base. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Aviano Air Base. It is a shared air base with Italy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we don't totally, in fact, we don't own the base at all. Italy owns it.
We rent it from them.
Correct. Yeah. But it's quite interesting how it is shared. It really is. It's a beautiful base. But anyway, he says, so we got high-level alert to the extent where we're told to evacuate the base. Airplanes are evacuating. People are evacuating. And EOD is called out. And he said, we're all waiting. And he said, I'm waiting outside my gate parameters, I guess, wherever they kept them. And he says, after a couple of hours standing out there in the sweltering heat, he says, I see this EOD bomb tech in a EOD bomb suit running at me. And he says, I start sweating. This is not good. You don't want an EOD tech running at you.
No.
He says, I don't know whether I need to run that way because he's running this way and I need to turn around and run. He says, but I'm watching him getting closer, and he's getting closer, and he finally gets up to the gate that's closed between us. And he says, all right. And he says, what's going on? And he says, this airman takes his helmet off, and he says, everything's A-okay, sir. And I was like, yeah, that would sound like something Adam would do. And he said, did you raise him to be that way? And I was like, And I said, yeah, I'm not going to lay claim to that one, but he said, but, and then that was also when he had asked me about, did he bring stray animals home? So he said, yeah, he said, I got to know your son very well. He said, I was very blessed to know your son. So yes, ma'am, he said, I am absolutely here to not just say goodbye, but celebrate that life that you brought into this world. And I said, well, as you can see, we're all gathered here. I brought out my beer. I said, would you like to join us? And he said, I would love to. He said, I'm next. So we got him one, and he popped, and he went up there, and he did his salute to Adam, and he just stood up there at the casket for a little while with his hand on there, and then he backed up, and he told another little story. And then he came over and he stood next to me. And just as he got there, the doors open again, right? So it's like, we can't take another turn. This time, a uniform walks in. And I look, and they're, oh my gosh, the beers are up the shirt. I mean, so I just put mine down. There's like a two-step thing. But I just put my beer down, And this man walks over to me, and of course, he says Mrs. Ginnet, but it's okay. But he takes my hand, and he says, I'm General Brown. And we're talking the General Brown. That was just the commander of all the Air Forces. But I said, but to me at that time, and he said, I knew your son. I served with him. He served under me in Iraq twice. And I said, okay. And he said, I could not be more honored to have had an airman be a part of our Air Corps the way your son was. And he said, you needed to hear that from me. Nobody else. And I said, well, I thank you for that. I really do. And he said, well, if you'll excuse me, ma'am, I need to get down to Shaw Air Force Base. But I will see you tomorrow night at Adam's visitation. And I thought, Shaw Air Force Base, that's in South Carolina. You mean Seymour? He said, no, ma'am, I need to go to Shaw. Okay, so you're going to drive 2 hours down to Shaw and come back. And he said, I'm not driving, they do. He says,
he's going to be playing Candy Crush on his phone.
Yeah.
So he said, I will talk to you again tomorrow before Adam's visitation, if that's okay. And I said, well, you're welcome to join us. And he said, I really wish I could. But he said, unfortunately, I've got a lot of paperwork I've got to get done, and my plane had just landed. And I said, well, I hate that. I wish you would stay, because as soon as we're done here, there was Adam's favorite eating place. It was just down the road. It was called Bull Feathers. Beers and wings. It had beers and wings. That was Adam. And I said, we're all going to go down there and eat. Are you sure you don't want to join us? And he said, and he came over and he just, I can't even tell you the hug that he gave us. And he said, bless you. He said, I just want to bless you. And he said, I wish I could. He said, but I can't. And he said, but I will touch base with you before the visitation tomorrow. You and I will have alone time. We need some alone time. I need to talk to you about some things. I said, okay. And so as he's getting ready to walk out, he looks at Lieutenant Colonel Bloomer and he said, a moment of your time out in the parking lot. And I'm like, whoa. I don't want anybody here getting into any trouble on account, because that's the mom and me. These are my boys. These are right, And he said, no, ma'am, you don't worry about a thing. Everything's fine. He said, but Lieutenant Bloomer, I need a couple of... And some of the guys, as they're walking out the door, they're going, ooh. And I'm like, you stop. You all stop. Now, And so I said, look, we're just going to continue. Come on, And so we were continuing. And the door slid open. And it was Lieutenant Colonel Bloomer. And I turned around and I said, is everything all right? Are you okay? And he said, yeah, we're fine. He gave us his credit card. And he's like, all right. So we did, yeah.
A lot of beer and wings.
Well, we went down to Bull Feathers. We did. And it was the right thing to do because that was Adam's favorite place. And
do you like his wings? Spicy?
Hot. Oh my gosh.
Excellent.
I don't know how he could have done it, but he would do it. He tried to talk me into it a couple of times, but no. And, but we had gathered into there, and Lieutenant Colonel, they had a couple of guys playing guitar and a drum, nothing super loud, but it was nice. It was nice music, where you could have a conversation, I guess, best thing. And the Lieutenant Colonel got up and he went over there and talked to them for a couple of minutes, and they stopped playing, and he got up to the microphone and he said, "Can I have everybody's attention, please, in the restaurant? I know you're all eating and everything." But he said, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Boomer with the United States Air Force. I can't believe that not anybody here hasn't heard the news that you have had a fallen hero. His body is here and just down the street at the funeral home down here. And his family is right here, celebrating his life in the most favorite place that their son loved. And we would love for you to celebrate. It's their wish that you would celebrate his life and his service as well. So if y'all would raise your glasses, let's toast to the family that raised incredible airmen and who did incredible service to our country. And I mean, you could hear a pin drop in there. And he did a wonderful toast and everything, and I turn around to sit back down at the table. And our table, there's no room to put a thing, because there is beer and shot glasses. I mean, literally.
As it should be.
Right? And they kept coming. People were just, I mean, I was just like pushing stuff away. You know, it wasn't that I didn't want it, but it was just, you know. But I was very touched by people coming over and just, they took their time away from their dinner and whatnot. And so I did have a picture for you, but so visitation comes. Adam was in his 5th year, 6th year when we had the AR made for him. I think that was about it, his 5th or 6th year. We had good friends of ours that owned the manufacturing company that makes y'all's ARs for the military. They had the sole contract. And it was father-son that owned this, and we had been friends with them for a couple of years. And I had asked Daddy. They were Charlie Bird Junior and Senior, but Junior was much taller than Daddy. But anyway, we had asked them, would you build an AR for Adam as a gift for us? And we'll pay you to do that. You know, we're not asking you to do this for free. Sure, we'll be happy to do this. And he had been deployed. He was in Iraq. He was on a second deployment in Iraq. And so we knew when he was coming home, can you have it done for when he comes home? I'd love for that to be a surprise for him, you know. And yeah, we'll get right on it, you know. So time came and Adam came home. And Charlie had called us and said, yeah, it's done. We've got it here. Bring him to the front of the manufacturing plant, the lobby area, and we'll take it from there. Okay, sure. So we get in there, and both Charlies come out, and they introduce themselves to Adam. And they said, do you want to go see how your AR is made? And Adam's like, sure. So they go through the plant, bit by bit, showing, you know, and Adam's just thinking he's getting this tour, you know. And they get to the very end, and they said, so this is the finished product. Tell us what you think. And they put it in his hands. Well, we had Adam's name engraved on the receiver, and on the other side, Air Force symbol, plus the EOD crab. And so he's got it in his hand, and he's like, ooh, this is nice. It's like, and he looks down and he sees his name, and he says, what the hell is this? And I said, well, Merry Christmas, Happy Thanksgiving, Happy Birthday to all the ones that you made me miss. There you go. Okay? Actually, this was like 8th or 9th year, I think, because we were really up there. And, but yeah, he was like, whose mom and dad does this? And I said, yours? You know? He said, how? I said, no. I said, we know Charlie and Charlie. We've known them for years. You just didn't know that. He said, so you're the ones that have been sending us the suppressors. And I was like, yeah, because they've made them for you, knowing us. And they've been wanting Adam and his guys to try them. And then Adam would write back to me, hey, these are great, you know, blah, blah. And they just send them more, you know. And he was like, whoa, this is... So he went through a lot of red tape to be able to carry his own. Sure. And so where I'm going with this is because I know this sounds crazy, but it was probably second night, third night, I don't know. One of the nights I'm not sleeping, shortly after we were notified, you know. I'm in the living room and I go and wake him up and I was like, where's his rifle? Where's his rifle? And Jim's like, I don't know where his rifle is. I said, oh my gosh, we got to call Jim first thing in the morning. We got to find. And he's like, okay. So called Jim Brewster, first thing in the morning, I said, look, this is what happened. He's got his own personal. It's got his name on it. And he's like, ooh, that could be tough, but, I'll look into it, So, when it came time, it was about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours before the visitation, General Brown came to meet with us. And he was like, he talked to us a lot about what he knew about Adam, which was phenomenal to me. And he talked about a couple of instances in Iraq that was on his second tour, where he said he had met Adam and just he knew the kind of man that he was, but he was just profoundly proud of him and wanted to honor him. And so he said, I will be handing you his, he's just going through everything. I'll be handing you his flag. I will be handing you all of his service ribbons and his medals. We're going to do that at the visitation, if that's okay with you. He said, I've kind of put a program together. And I was like, well, thank you for doing that. I mean, I certainly didn't think about anything like that. And so we walk into the church, and the very first thing that I see is Adam's rifle. And they had gotten on it. And apparently it had been located in Kandahar. It was still there on base. Somebody had secured it, but they had it. They flew it home that quickly. They had like a 78, 72 hour turnaround. But they got it to both of the Charlies. They got it to them. And both the Charlies had built a box with an American flag behind it. And there's two breasts. There's one that says to, I can't tell you, I got a picture of it. And something to when he reached heaven. And that's what I zeroed in on. I know that sounds crazy. But Jim Brewster said, yeah. He said there was a lot of generals involved. There was a lot of red tape getting that thing back stateside. And I know that just sounds crazy, but I just knew it was, it was still part of him. He came home, And, of course, then you see his boots and his helmet. They've got that there with another AR upside down. But quite frankly, they did quite a beautiful service for the visitation. They really did. And General Brown did each medal separately, explaining how Adam earned those medals. And then he came down and placed them each in my hand himself, which means a lot, So, cold day. The cemetery. We'll get into that. The ugly mom came out once more. Again. So, when Adam's body came home to Seymour, that afternoon, while we were riding in the limo, Jim Brewster said, oh, I've got notification here. I've got to let you know the National Cemetery is closed. So Daddy's sitting in front of me, because it's those two opposite seat things, and I'm looking at Daddy, and I said, now what? Because he's the one that said bring him home. Yeah. And I said, now what? And Daddy said, he said, it's all right. And so, Raleigh Memorial Cemetery. Apparently, the land that the cemetery sits on belonged to a Marine Corps friend of my dad's who he played poker with every Thursday night.
Of course.
Okay. I didn't know this. Okay. But he's on his little cell phone in the limo, and he gets a hold of George. And he says, George, hey, this Jim Haslam. He says, listen, my grandson has been killed in Afghanistan. And he said, I need to give him my space at the cemetery. Will you make sure that that's prepared for when my daughter needs it? And I can hear George saying, no, Jim, we've got a veterans section. And Daddy said, since when? I know nothing about it. I said, Jim, we've had it for quite a few years, but he said, we do have it, and when Christy's ready, just bring her to the cemetery and we'll help her walk her through it and we'll get her through it, okay? He said, well, I appreciate that. So his son at the time, Bob, was running the center. George had pretty much retired. He was, and so Bob had met us the morning of the visitation and walked us down to the veteran section, and it was Jim, Sarah, and I, and Jim Brewster. And again, I'm standing there and I'm looking around, and I'm like, it's not my job, folks. I can't do this. And Bob came over and he said, I know. And he said, but I can't say that I know what it's like for a mom. But I've dealt with many moms that have had to pick out places to lay their babies. He said, you take this journey. You take it however long you need. So, quite honestly, we only got 3 hours. And I'm like, okay. He said, but this is our veteran section. It's yours, darling. You get to choose. I can't choose it for you. So Jim and I and Sarah, we're walking around. I mean, I'm just blindly walking around. Until I got to this one spot, and it's close to the flags, where the island of service flags are. And I happened to look up, and I'm looking up, and I'm right in line with the Air Force flag. And I was like, okay. And then I look down, and I'm looking right where I'm standing. And there's deer poop. Okay? And I looked at Jim, and I said, all right, Adam chose this. I didn't do it. He's like, Mom, there's the flag. Here's my spot. What else do you want me to do? I'm just telling you, okay? I knew. And Sarah was like, oh, Mom, you're right on. Right on. So Bob said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, we're right on. So he puts the flags down. And Daddy stands there, and he's looking, and he says, oh, my God. And I said, what is it, Daddy? And he says, it's your uncle right there. Just one row up, but about right where you're sitting. So we're already in your family.
Yep.
Right? I didn't know that, but Daddy did. Just by looking. He really didn't know that my uncle was there. He knew he was at the cemetery, but not there. And so that was, again, this is a week-long process. From the time that I got notified to the day of the funeral, it was a 1-week process.
That's a lot of coffee.
That I was... Oof.
And chicken wings.
I didn't eat. I mean, if I ate anything, I was very, very sparse, and I couldn't even tell you if I ate. I mean, I know there were a couple of bites of something that people were over my shoulder, making sure I would take the bite.
Making sure that you ate something. Get something in your system.
Yeah. But, yeah, and it's a week that I would hope that I would never have to go through ever again. But I will tell you this, where the next, Angry Mama came out for better lack of words, was several nights after the funeral. Now here I was blessed. I know this is going to sound really crazy. The night of January 9th, was it 26th? Yeah, because it was about a week later. His funeral, the night of his funeral, okay? I had family in the house. I had 5, 6 EOD techs in the house, and they got snowed in. We had a snowstorm, and they couldn't get out. Those guys couldn't get out. And I was so blessed because they were family. They were there in my house. And again, at this point, thank God for all the dishes that had been brought to the house, because I didn't have to worry about feeding anybody, especially after that snowstorm. But yeah, I was ever so thankful. And but it was about a week or two after the funeral. Many nights I'm not sleeping. I just couldn't sleep. Sat in my living room in the dark a lot. It was my time to cry. It was my time to talk to Adam. It was my time. But I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, what the hell do you mean the cemetery's closed? What does that mean? Because I can remember growing up, every Memorial Day, just before Memorial Day and just before Veterans Day, Daddy would have us out there at the National Cemetery, hooked up with one of the military guys, and we had to go out. And look, guys, I can remember this from the time I was little, when I was pulling a little red wagon of flags. Okay.
Yep.
This was my daddy. He made sure us kids understood from the time that I can remember. This is where we bury our heroes. To the point where I can remember, and I did that with my own kids. Did it with my own kids. Adam and Sarah had to do the same thing. And we would go out there with Grandpa. And as soon as, so Adam and Sarah had very clear understanding as well. And I can remember one day I was walking with a serviceman, and there was some white marble that was there with nothing on it. And I can remember asking him, I said, do I put a flag here? Nothing on it. And he said, no. That's a reserved spot. He hasn't passed away yet. And that rang into my ears all of a sudden. And I was like, what? Wait, what do you mean there's a closed sign if some veteran has a reserved spot that hasn't died yet, but my son was killed, and that spot's not appropriated for immediately? I think killed in action ought to take precedence. Just saying. So I sat down that night. I wrote every senator and every congressman in this country. I said the same thing. Basically, my core letter said, can't not believe for the life of me that you didn't think there would be a KIA coming home when y'all decided to put boots on the ground for these conflicts. And in saying that, if you knew national cemeteries have a closed sign, meaning there's no more room, I'm guessing, then why, rather than some dang on developer getting a new land for a new strip mall, why didn't you appropriate that land and make National Cemetery B, C, however much land do you need to appropriate for our new KIAs coming home? Because obviously there's no more room. And I said, that's unconscionable. I said, if anything, there should be a standard operating procedure that if you, and I'm sorry to say this, but if you came home and you got a reserved spot at the National Cemetery, I would hope that you've lived a good life, that you've made a good life for yourself and your family and all that good stuff. But sorry, KIA's come home, appropriated your space, going to have to go find someplace else. And that's what ought to happen. I said, don't ever do this to another Gold Star mother. Don't ever put another closed sign on one of our... And that's how I ended it. But I sent it to every congressman, every senator. I mean, every politician that's out there. I not only sent it to their D.C. offices, sent it to their home offices in their states to make sure that they got it. I went to the post office. I had I got a call from John McCain. Condolences only, you know. But your letter was well received, and we appreciate it. Sure you do. I can tell by the tone of your voice you're gung-ho happy about it, but appreciate your phone call. There were quite a few other congressmen that called me, and quite a few. But Senator Burr, Richard Burr, he called me. And he said, I am your local representative. And I said, okay. And he said, Mrs. Kazakavage, he said, first of all, let me just say, your letter has created quite a firestorm in D.C. And I said, well, good, you're the first person to say that. And he said, no, ma'am. He said, you are absolutely right. It is in the SOPs. It is in the National Cemetery SOPs. He says, do you know how many national cemeteries you have in North Carolina? I said, 3. He said, well, you know. And I said, yes, I do. But I wasn't going to send Adam to New Bern or Salisbury. It's not going to happen. And he said, oh, no, I get that. He said, but let me tell you where the closed sign came from. And I said, oh, please do. I can't wait.
This ought to be good.
Right? He said, well, after Korea happened, because when World War II ended, there was a bulk of our World War II veterans that quickly reserved their spaces. Arlington and their home state, or their home state, national cemetery. So they were the first wave, okay? Korea came, that was the next wave. The Korean veterans came home. To the point where, this is what he said, to the point where when our Vietnam veterans came home, there was no more room. And I said, I flat out said, so you screwed our Vietnam veterans once again. Is that what you're telling me? No, ma'am. I said, oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. Because you're telling me by your very own lips that there's not a Vietnam vet that has a reserved space in our state. I don't know about Arlington. I can't speak for Arlington. But you're telling me in Raleigh National Cemetery, who I was told has a closed sign on it, that a Vietnam vet doesn't have a reserved space in there. So why are we not appropriating more land? And he said, well, let me tell you, he said, you've created this firestorm. There's an emergency symposium for all department heads of all national cemeteries throughout the United States to come to D.C. and we're to go over the SOP to make sure this doesn't happen. And I said, more than that, you owe our veterans more than that. And he said,
other than a junket where we all get together and
right,
have
lunch,
have a party and a luncheon,
right?
Yes.
And he said, let me tell you what I can offer you. And I said, oh, okay. He said, well, we can re-inter Adam, move him to Raleigh National, if you would like that. Full military honors. It's just like we're not just going to pick him up one day and just carry him over there. We'll do the full military funeral again for you. But he said, I've got your paperwork in front of me for his veterans marker for Raleigh Memorial. And he said, as you know, with the national cemeteries, the marble, you're very limited as to what you can have on there. Yep. You can have a Christian symbol or religious symbol. You can have their name, date of birth, KIA, but nothing else. You can have Afghanistan on there, but you can't have anything else. He said, so with that said, though, he said, I do see, even on VA markers, there's limited space. Here's another thing y'all need to know. You're limited on what your marker is based on your years of service. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I was astounded. I was astounded. So I kind of looked at, my daddy, and I was like, did you know that? So now you've retired, so we can put anything we want on your right? And I was just, and he said, listen, he said, I'm willing to rip up this paperwork, get your KO, another one. You can have on there whatever you want, however much you want, if that's your desire to keep Adam where he's at. So I told him, I said, okay, I need to talk to the family first. I just can't, and so talked to Jim and Sarah, and we were pretty much in agreement this was not something we could go through again. I was not really. It was just too emotional. And I don't think Adam would have wanted that. Adam was always just pretty much a don't do just for me without doing for others. I mean, he was always that way with his APO boxes that I would send. Mom, you can't send me stuff that I can't share with my guys. So if you're sending me, cookies or something, it's got to be enough, That was just how things were. And and then Senator Burr said, he said, once your KO gets that back to me, he said, I'll put a rush order on that, because as you know, most markers take up to 10 to 12 months for completion. And I said, okay. And so I called him back 2 days later, and I said, the family's decided we're going to keep Adam where he's at. And he said, yep. And he said, I see your KO has already sent your paperwork in, because we'd already, And he said, I've already put a rush order in that. And he said, but again, he said, I thank you for your letter. Absolutely appropriate, most needed. And so about 3 weeks later, I get a call from Bob at the cemetery. He says, you're not going to believe this, but Adam's marker's here. And I said, oh, good. He said, do you want to come up? He said, I've never had a marker come in this fast. And I said, yeah, long story. So we went up there to watch the placement, and everything was there. That should have been. So I was very thankful for that. But yeah, we were good. And I think throughout everything, we have found a lot of blessings along the way.
Okay, well, let's take another break real
Sure.
quick, but keep that in mind. You said before the break that everything that you guys had been through brought you blessings. And one of the ones that you had mentioned earlier was the changed relationship with your father. Mm-hmm. What else?
Being able to see more of what Adam accomplished. I've been able to do that through other people. About a year after Adam was killed, I actually was accepted on the EOD Foundation's board. I was when I first joined them, I was accepted on as their treasurer. So I worked on the board as the treasurer. And so I got to see a lot more of the people and more in depth of EOD and what it was and who it was and why it was. And I say that with a lot of reverence, because even at that time when I first joined there was the EOD Wounded Warrior Foundation. Then there was also the EOD Memorial Foundation. These were two separate entities. And I was actually on the EOD Wounded Warrior Foundation, not the Memorial Foundation. So I was on their board. Both each had their own board. And so I got to see a lot more of the veterans, the wounded veterans. I was making regular visits to Walter Reed on a couple of EOD guys that I knew. One who Literally, he was critically injured. I mean, the whole bottom of his face had been blown off. And the left side here, his left arm to the elbow had been blown off. But this was the crucial. The face was the crucial. And he had other internal injuries within the chest and whatnot. And his family didn't want to see him. They didn't want to see him. And it was a long time. You remember the $1 Million Man?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I used to call him and I'd go in there and say, "You're my little $1 Million Man, you know, they're rebuilding you, you know, you're going to be bionic." And I was, I knew it wasn't going to be bionic, but he just, you know, for a long time he had patches over his eyes, you know, he could, you know, there was shrapnel and stuff in his eyes, and they weren't sure he was going to see again. But I'd go there and I would sit and I would just hold his hand and I would touch him. I would touch his forehead and I would stroke his hair and just let him know, "I love you. I love you. You're very important. You know, Adam loved you. He knew you. You know, and it's okay that you're here. Because Mom and Dad love you and Sarah loves you." And so for 2.5 years I watched the rebuild of this young man's face. And I was very blessed for that. He got a cadaver bone built here and here, and then of course had cadaver skin that was.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, sometimes I will tell you, at Walter Reed, they're phenomenal. The job they did to me was just phenomenal. And restructuring his arm. And he still had to write because he had no teeth, you know. And I can remember him writing, and he was saying, "I'm never going to smile again. I'm never going to laugh again." He'd write things in, and he knew that Mama could be tough, you know. And I would write out the word, you know, "You're going to do it," you know. And if I've got to tickle your feet every day, I'm going to, whatever, you know. And I just, one day, he wrote on his little thing, he said, "Can I come home with you?" And I said, "Absolutely. Absolutely. When you're ready and they're ready to let you out, you got home. You got a home. No worries there. No worries." And so they released him, but it was constantly having to take him back and forth because they were still having to do surgeries. And I can remember the day that they put implants in, and he smiled, and I said, "Ha ha!"
Got him.
I said, "Look at that!" And he was looking at himself, and I said, "See?" And he said, "But I got somebody else's face." And I said, "Well, it's not Clint Eastwood and it's not Elvis, but we'll do it. Okay?
It'll do in a pinch."
Right? And he kept touching, and I could see that, you know, there were scars, and he was learning to move the jaw to form words. So it was all a very slow process, and thankfully, and I thank you, Lord, you know, he was able to see, not well, but, you know, not anything that prescription glasses, and we all know how that works. But I remember, gosh, it was almost a year later, but he got all excited and started screaming, and he said, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this." And I said, "What?" You know, I figured something's hurt, you know, what, you fell down the stairs, you know, and he's like, "Look, I got a man's skin and I got man's face." And I said, "How do you know that?" Because it's a cadaver, you know. "How do you know that?" And he said, "Mom, there's stubble. Feel." And sure enough, he was growing a beard. So when we went back up to Walter Reed, because he was letting it grow, you know. So by the time we had the appointment,
he earned it. So.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he had, to which he's never, I hate to say it, but he's never shaved it. I mean, he trims it down, but because it hides the scars, you know. And so I said, "See, you got a beard. it's filled out. You've got your own face, your own identity. You're good to go. And he's got, he had a service dog. The service dog just recently passed away about a couple of weeks ago that he had named Adam. That was his service dog. So we had to go through all that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say that exasperatingly, but all of these things, there's been another veteran that had a service dog that he named after Adam, and we were very fortunate that he lived in Holly Springs, which is not too far from us.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I would be, I'm just gonna say I hate Walmart. I'm just not a Walmart liker. But there are some times, where I've had to go in through those doors for something, and you just kind of take that deep breath in, and you almost feel like you're holding it, like you're, jumping in dirty water or something. So I go in there, and I was in Holly Springs Walmart, and all of a sudden, there's this dog, and I knew it was Adam because, of course, it's got his name on his vest, and he's just wagging his tail and just loving on me, and I'm on the floor, we're just kissing and loving. And Troy comes over, and he says, I don't know how he knew you were in this store. But he said he acted up, and I dropped the leash, and this is where I found him. And
I've heard that dogs have a very strong sense of smell.
Is that true?
Or just,
I've heard it.
Just a sense of whatever. They have, that we just can't even...
we don't even fully understand what they know.
We don't.
Yeah.
And it happened on more than one occasion. Mm-hmm. It got to be like every once in a while I would purposely stop into the Holly Springs Walmart just hoping that Troy would be there. And there were a couple of times. I mean, there was one time I almost got really disappointed because I was in line. This was before self-checkout. And the proverbial one line only.
Right.
And so I was in line, and I was kind of feeling a little depressed, that it didn't happen, And then all of a sudden there was this dog. He's pushed up against me, and I look down, and there he is, and I see Troy standing back there, and he's like, so we had our moment. I said, "He knew," because I was starting to cry, because, but yeah, so, but then I was, totally blessed with working with the EOD Foundation. They did a merger. We became the EOD Warrior Foundation. It was no longer two boards, it was one. Navy EOD retired man by the name of Ken Falk was very instrumental in making sure that came to fruition. But I was really blessed to be a part of that, and being a part of the EOD Foundation, I've been able to work with other we call them EOD Gold Stars, and quite honestly, we don't even call them Gold Stars. We call them legacy families. And that's after their loved one's name goes on the wall, which is at Eglin Air Force Base. Nav School is there at Eglin, and right across the way is the wall. When the families are first brought in, they're honoree families, to see their loved one's name. And the only way their name is put on the wall is they have had to die not in service, but in
action or in training.
Well, actually, has to be within EOD, doing something EOD.
Yeah.
Whether and even if they're training and a bomb goes off.
Yep.
Yes. Then because then they're in the performance of that duty still. We have very few of those, thankfully. God bless, that we've had very few in training. Nav School's pretty strict. So I've gotten to know a lot of people. I mean, even you two. I mean, to me, it's just, you get to meet a lot of veterans that make it worthwhile. There's some that you just kind of look at and you're like, and I love being called mom, because the first Saturday of every May, is National EOD Memorial Day. Don't know if you know that. But we usually go down there that week before, just because all the EOD guys come in, and we're up to shenanigans with them, you know. That Friday night we have a huge auction and those boys, so I'm sure you've been there. Those boys and girls will, and I've been guilty, but they'll bid on anything and everything, you know, and they don't care how much money they spend, you know, to get it. I mean, seriously,
It's for a good cause.
how many more senior, you know, master crabs do you need in your house? You know, I'm just saying. But you've gone ahead and spent $10,000 on that one. Okay, we appreciate the money. Here, give us the visa. You know.
There you go.
And but that's been my joy. That's been my joy.
It's been going on 20 years now. What do you do to help keep Adam's family alive, our memory alive for you and for your family, for those that knew him best?
Yeah, so again, you know, I don't know, the Memorial Day weekend, I mean, that whole week, that's, you know, that's our family. That's our family. I mean, wow. It's kind of, you know, it's kind of interesting that I want to say you said that, because my daughter and I were just having that conversation at supper last Friday night, and she said something very interesting to me. She said, "Mom, nobody cares anymore." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Nobody cares." I said, "Honey," she said, "Look, you know, everybody, when the conflicts were happening, everybody was keeping in touch, and not just that, but the general public cared about Memorial Day, cared about Veterans Day, cared about this, Flag Day, cared about that, cared about this. And, you know, there were organizations out there that were, hey, we want to honor your hero. We've heard that he's been killed in action. You know, these were all the conflicts were still there." And she said, "Now it's all dropped off. It's all dropped off." And I mean, and she has a point. When I feel like I have to fight for somebody to understand what Memorial Day is, that's when it gets more than exasperating for me. And trust me, the Harnett County Veterans Council, that lady that runs that one, she don't like me. And it's not something I'm proud of. But a couple of Memorial Days ago, I mean, flowers were placed at the Blue Star Mother's Monument. But there's nothing at the Gold Star or the Global War on Terrorism, which actually has our fallen on it, which I prefer. So I was like, what? Why? And why do we have politicians coming here doing speeches? Other than Senator Ron Rabin, who I know, who's retired, Army retired. He's a senator that will fight for the veteran. He does it every day. This man is, 92? And I watch him even on Facebook. And he's still phenomenal, fighting for what this country needs to remember our veterans, what they've done, why they do it. And like what's going on right now and the arguments and everything. And he's like, right now, he's like, but unless you're willing to put those boots on and you're willing to take that oath, you can't, he says, you don't have an argument in the game. You don't, you don't have an equivocal argument in the game, because you're not going to understand. Those boys, you did. You knew that you had to fight. You had to follow orders. That's what it's all about. when you sign, it's not any different than when I took the oath to be a police officer when I was a sheriff's deputy. I still took an oath. I had to, because that's what they require of you in order to wear the uniform and the badge and to do the job, because I'm a public servant. You're more than a public servant. You're the country's servant. People don't grasp that.
There's an old Kipling poem. I think it's called The Soldier's Prayer. It's very short.
Yeah.
It's just, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but in times of war and not before, God and soldier we adore. But when war is over and all is righted, God is forgotten and the soldier is slighted.
Yeah. And I can remember, shortly after 9/11, when everybody was waving flags and everything, and I can remember my dad saying one day, said, that'll end. They'll stop. When it no longer serves their purpose, he said, that'll stop. And he was right.
Yeah. And it didn't take very long.
And it didn't. And so where Adam is buried at Raleigh Memorial, again, he did in that very first year. So I had told Adam, I had told Jim and Sarah, we got to get a wreath for Adam's grave. And they're like, yeah, okay, we need to do that. And I had heard about wreaths across America, And I had called them. And I said, and they said, is your son at a national cemetery? I said, no, ma'am, he's in the veterans section of a, I guess, private cemetery. Well, we don't do that unless you're willing to do a fundraiser for us. And I said, so you want me to work for you to get a wreath for my son's grave? And she's like, well, yeah, that's pretty much how it's required to do, because we only service national cemeteries.
Right.
Okay. So I said, all right. And I said, how much are your wreaths? And this is 2010, and that time the wreaths were $25. And I said, are you serious? You want me to go door to door to somebody's house, and I'm probably going to get somebody that's not too happy that our people, our troops are on the ground over there, and they're going to slam their door in my face because they're not going to part with $25 for a wreath for a soldier's grave when they've got money to spend for Christmas. I mean, reality, okay? So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, what am I going to do? And then I thought, ooh, and I can hear Adam. I could hear him. Mom, don't be laying no wreath at my grave, and you ain't willing to do the others. Don't do it. I don't want one. I literally went up to the cemetery. I was like, are you serious? And I'm looking around. I mean, we have a veteran section, but I have walked that cemetery. And in the very, very far back, which is actually the front of the cemetery, we're at the very back, there is a hill, and there's a slew of World War I and World War II up on that hill. And over here, there's World War II, and there's a bunch of Korea veterans. And I know nobody's touched those ever. And I'm literally sitting there at Adam's grave, and I'm like, you're talking, I can't just do this section. I've got to do it. And I swear, he said, Mama, you've got to do for what you can. And I just literally that night, I was like, what do I do? There's no way that I can do this. I can't do this whole thing. And so I had gone to my dad's house the next day, and I'm sitting there talking, and my dad, retired Marine, but after he retired from the Marine Corps, he had become a horticulturist. He had gone to NC State, put himself through school, and became a certified horticulturist, and had started his own company called Trees, etc. So a lot of the trees that you see around RDU and Cary and Raleigh, my dad's company put in. He transplanted big trees, mature trees. So I mistakenly go to Daddy's house, and I said, and told him, I really didn't tell him that I had a conversation with Adam, but I said, I know that he wouldn't be happy, Daddy. What do I do? And he says, there's 141 Christmas tree farms in this state, and you're asking me what to do? I was like, got it. I understand. I went home, and opened up my laptop, and I start calling Christmas Trees Farms in North Carolina, telling them who I am, what I'm doing, why I'm doing this. Would they be willing to help me and at an affordable price? I could do fundraisers, but I need to make it affordable for those that want to buy a wreath. It got to the 48th farm on my list, way up in the mountains, Laurel Springs. Turns out that the man was Air Force, and both he and his wife were on the phone, and he said, "Ma'am, we would be honored to do your wreaths for you." And he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "we'll make all those wreaths at $8 a piece, and we will never change that price for you, if that would be good for you. So the only thing that I would ask is that you come and pick them up, because the price of shipping could really outdo me." And I said, "You're the only one that's been willing to work with me on this. We would love to do this." And so we joined with them, and the first couple of years, the CVMA, Combat Vets Motorcycle Association, have been running fundraisers for us, and that's what we do.
I thought you were going to tell me that the guys on motorcycles transported thousands of wreaths halfway across the street.
No, none of them have actually gone up there.
I'd love to see
with
that.
us. But here's the thing that, falling back on what we were just saying and how people are forgetting, because the first few years, again, people were attending our fundraiser, and so we were getting 200, 300, 400. I think one year we got 500 and some odd wreaths, and we had 2 trailers that we went up there and we got them and brought them back, and lovingly, my daughter and I make bows for every one of them. My daughter also makes the bows for, we have bigger ones made for the Island of Flags.
Yeah.
And so we place those, and there's a memorial stone that's in the middle for our POW MIAs. So we make sure so she always makes a bow for each of those wreaths in accordance to the colors of that branch. And so that year when we ordered 500, we started early on making our bows.
I imagine so. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was okay. We and Jim makes cards. They're business size cards with a flag and an eagle on there, and it just says "Merry Christmas, thank you for your service." I want to say about the 3rd or 4th year that we were into it, there was a man that came over to us, and I got this tap on my shoulder, and I turned, and he had one of the wreaths that we had just laid out, right? He had it in his hands. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you the lady that put this on my dad's grave?" And I thought, I did something wrong,
Maybe.
Right? And I said, "Well, yes." I said, is your dad a veteran? So, we clearly marked them, We mark them with popsicle sticks, because we have the young Marines that come out and help us, and other people that come out to help us lay the wreaths, and I want them to be able to find them easily. So I have popsicle sticks that say veterans on them, so they don't have to, take that time to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Not that World War I on the stone should tell you, but I try to help wherever I can. And I said, "Yes." I said, "He's a veteran," and there was I said, "There was." There, "Yes, ma'am." And he said, "Nobody's ever done this for my daddy." And I said, "Well, we're doing it now." And he said, "But my daddy's been gone for 30 years. And I said, "Well, I'm so sorry for that. So sorry." He said, "Ma'am, you don't know what this means." And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." I said, "Because that's my son up there. And I tell you, I said, he was killed in action. And that's how you get to meet those people." I've met so many family members that have come, and now I'm affectionately known at Raleigh Memorial Cemetery as the Wreath Lady.
There are worse nicknames.
There are
to have.
definitely
Right?
worse.
I guess. just this past year, well, we were up there, and we go up there like 2 days before we're going to lay out the wreaths. It's always on a Saturday. It's the second Saturday in December, and we invite you to come. We'd love for you to come. But we always do it in conjunction to Wreaths Across America. I try, our veterans are just as important.
Yep.
Okay? And so I do it on the same Saturday. It's the second Saturday in December. And our young Marines come up, and we have a slew of American Legion riders, combat vet riders. They all come up and their wives, and we lay out all the wreaths, and it's an assembly line. We get the boxes of bows out, and everybody's on the ground, and we're putting all the stuff on. So there's that, and then we go and we lay them out. So it was just 2 years ago. We had I could tell that there was a funeral about to happen in the veterans section, and I had my granddaughter. My granddaughter goes with me all the time, and she's been going with me since she was first born, when I had carried her out there. But now she gets to go out and she helps me, and so we took her with us. And I said, tell you what, it looks like they're getting ready to have a funeral, and it was actually down just a little bit below where Adam is. I said, let's start in the upper section of the veterans section. We can get that done while they're doing their funeral, and then after that we can. And one of the reasons I do the veterans section first is to get an accurate count for that section, because in just the past couple of years, bless their hearts, like I said, the CVMA and the American Legion Riders, they've been doing our fundraisers, but people haven't really coming forth with the money. So I want to make sure that at least every veteran in the veterans section is covered.
Yeah.
And then whatever is extra, then we'll go up on the hills or whatever. And so I always do that first with my popsicle sticks. Kaden, who's my granddaughter, she helps me the night before. We put them in bundles of 50. So we have an accurate count by subtracting, and it's math for her as well. And then we have an accurate count, we write that down, and then we'll go and put popsicle sticks on the overflow. We call it an overflow on the other hills. But we're working our way down, and there's another KIA that's just 2 rows over from Adam. And here's the interesting thing about this, is that his parents were next door neighbors to my parents. And he was killed January 17th, 2 years after Adam. Adam was January 19th. I mean, it's just the chances of the families being close. My dad knew that was his neighbor, and they became Gold Stars. And my dad was the first one when he saw the uniforms. He was the first one. He went out the door and he was over there, So we've gotten to know Andrew's family very well. So there is that, So it's right now, for lack of better words, it feels like it's a struggle, because this is something we want to do, but without these fundraisers, because this past year when we put the popsicle sticks out, I was surprised. Now, we went from 189 in the veterans section to 275. That's a huge amount of veterans. We don't put a wreath down if it's a spouse. If the spouse has passed before the veteran, we don't do that, so that we can make sure we save
stretch it out a little bit.
Yeah. Exactly. It's not that we're trying to overlook them. But anyway, we get down to, after that funeral gets done, and there's this man and this woman that are walking towards me and my granddaughter, and the guy says, ma'am, are you the wreath lady? I said, well, yes, that would be me. And he said, can I give you a hug? And I said, sure. And he said, we just buried my mom. And I said, I'm so sorry for that. And he said, no, you don't know what you did for my mom when you kept putting a wreath at my dad's grave. She told us about it every year, how beautiful that wreath looked. And she would send us pictures. And I said, well, we're going to be putting the wreaths out this Saturday. You're more than welcome to come and put your daddy's wreath down yourself. And they were like, yeah, we would really love to do that. So I say that through all of this, I've met phenomenal families at the cemetery. Yeah, they call me the wreath lady, but that's Saturday. I mean, this December, if y'all can come out, to watch the amount of people that are still coming out to help try to... These guys need to know that they're loved.
Yeah.
They're loved. There's a veteran in there. His mom comes every once in a while. He had just come home from Afghanistan. He was just home 2 weeks, driving his truck. He was a CDL truck driver. And stopped at a truck stop and got robbed and was killed. And that's her memory. Here she prayed every day and every night.
To bring him home.
Mm-hmm.
For him to come home from Iraq, safe and sound, and he did that. He's working on American soil and he gets killed. That's what she gets to remember. You know? And so, yeah, I just feel it's my mission in life right now. And don't think that I don't have my moments. I do. I've had my meltdowns in stores. I mean, now's a perfect time. I can't even... okay. And I laugh because my daughter, she and I, Cadbury eggs, they were Adam's favorites. And I can remember the first year, you know, Adam was killed in January. And that first Easter, and she and I are out shopping for something, and I see Cadbury eggs, and I pick them up, and I start crying. Because I can't send them Cadbury eggs this year, you know. And I'm crying, and there's these two old ladies that come down the aisle, and they're just standing there watching me cry. I know I'm not, this is crying. I'm not. And I looked at the old ladies, and they're just this look of like, what the heck is wrong with you, woman, you know. And I said, yes, I'm crying over Cadbury eggs, deal with it. I threw them in my cart. And that was it. But
To this very day, they tell that same story when they
A little bit differently.
Some lady threw an egg at me.
But, you know, there's been things throughout our lives. My daughter's husband, he's, like I said, in the Army. He's a tank gunner in the Army. He and my daughter have been high school sweethearts. He was a year ahead of her in high school. And when he graduated, of course, she was a year behind. And he had flat out told her, he said, I'm going in the Army. And I don't want you waiting for me. You've got to enjoy your senior year. You've got to have fun. Don't wait on me, darling, because I don't know where the Army's going to send me. And I commended him for that. He was very mature about that. I watched my daughter be crushed. Love of her life was, as she put it, dropping her, you know?
Yeah.
And she was supposed to find other fish in the sea and all of this. And trust me, she dated 2 or 3 guys, and they did not hold up to Jonathan, and they quickly crashed and burned. But I did not know that they had been staying in touch, even on his deployments. And like I said, Zoom's a wonderful thing, but Mama doesn't know everything, you know? And that's okay. But there was a night, and it was August 2010, and we were in Walmart, and my daughter stopped, and I was like, what are you doing? And I looked, and I saw this guy in BDUs, and he's walking with purpose. I mean, purpose. And finally I could see it was Jonathan, but he's not looking at me, he's looking at Sarah. And he just walked right up to her, and his arms went right around her. And he said, I won't ever leave you again. And the two of them went to the ground, and she, for the first time for me, this was a cry that I had never heard since. I didn't hear her cry like this at his funeral. She may have, I don't know, but I didn't hear it. But I was hearing it now. and he had a hold of her, and there were people walking by, and they're clapping, because they see guy in BDUs, he must have just come home to his sweetheart, this is a wonderful thing, and all I'm hearing him saying is, I love you, I will never leave you, and I mean, seriously, at one point, I had to move away, and just let them be on the floor of Walmart, doing their thing.
Another Walmart story.
Right? Walmart's, I tell you. But he was true to his word. They got married 2 years later. He's been active duty reserve. He got out of, I guess, active duty so that it wouldn't put them at PCSing out and whatnot. He could stay here, Fort Bragg, which has been good because she didn't want to leave the farm. And so, and they've got 2 beautiful children, and he's been very true to his word. But like I said, he's fixing to retire. He's told her he's pretty much had enough. So
you know when you know.
You know when you know.
Yeah, and he does, and he knows, and he and I have had conversations. There's just things where he can't, and doesn't want to talk to her, but we sit outside and, Mom, got to talk because he needs somebody to talk to. I mean, he's got some guys that he serves with, but it's different. I get a lot of EOD guys. They'll call me or just come to the house. You got to cry, come with me, because they don't want to cry with Mom because they're afraid it's going to scare Mom. Yeah. And I get that because Adam probably didn't do that with me either. I mean, we talked about things, but we didn't talk too much about scary things. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, really, I never really delved into what did you see. I mean, there was, I think, after his second deployment, when he was at the house, and I could tell there was something wrong, and he was just like, Mom, it's bad. It's bad. I eat it. I taste it. I feel it.
You don't want to burden your family with it.
You don't. But I had told him, I said, look, I'm going to tell you something that your Papa Jim used to tell me growing up. There's horses in that barn. Go in a stall, cry into one of their manes, tell them your secrets, because those horses can't tell anybody else. And I used to do that. That's how I grew up, and I believed it, and trust me, I one of my horses, bless her heart, she was a brand new mama, and I went out there a lot of nights and just cried in her mane, and she stood there, and sadly, a week after Adam was killed, her baby died. And hearing her cry, and I went out there that one night. She was out in the middle of the pasture, and I could hear her. And I went out there, and I said, I know, baby. I said, you cry, you listen, But here's one thing that I always remember, and I always, to this day, is laying outside, and Adam would call me or just say something, Mom, if you're missing me, look at the sky, look at those stars, because I'm seeing the same ones. That's what's keeping us connected, is those stars. And I can remember when we were flying home from Dover, and I was sitting at the window seat, and you don't see the stars when you're in the plane. You don't see that. There's that level of light and darkness up in the sky. And I thought, well, Adam, you're up here. How are we going to see the same stars? How are we doing that? And there were still nights where I'll go out and take my blanket and just stare, and I know. And I see some twinkling in just the way, I just know. And I said, I see it, Adam. I see it. So, I'm going to... I don't want what conflict is happening now to be the reason we start remembering again. It's not that I'm not proud, trust me. I will support our troops to the day I die. I know they're doing what they're told to do. Just like if my chief told me, hey, you got to go and take care of that. I better go do it or I don't get paid, you know. But there are days, there are times where I'm tired of being looked at or known as a Gold Star. There's Adam's mom.
We've had a past Gold Star. She would have been a widow who said it's the worst club you can ever be in.
It is the worst club. And I say that reverently. It is not only because of the loss that we've experienced, but I've met a lot of Gold Stars in just the past 16 years. And we've all, of course, lost our loved one differently. Okay? So which leaves your grief to be different. And I cannot tell you the amount of Gold Star families that I've seen that flat out argue with each other. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why does that make a difference? And I know we're on the air and I'm going to share this, okay? So, excuse me, right? We're handed that. That's my Gold Star, okay? That purple in the background means that my son died in combat, in a war zone. Okay, that's what that means. My son died in a war zone. There's another Gold Star that's solid. It's square on a smaller thing that's square. It's not a small, but it's square. But the whole thing is solid gold. Okay, and that's known as the next of kin Gold Star. Okay. They've lost their loved one outside of a war zone, but in active duty service to their country.
In the line of duty. Yep.
They were active duty.
Yep.
Okay. Let's face it, DOD has their guideline. Okay. And that's that guideline. So to die in active duty, and then they're the ones that determine that. But if they're in a war zone, then that's pretty self-explanatory. There's Gold Stars that are fighting over the fact that we have two different Gold Stars. I'm not willing to get into that fight, but by golly, my son was in a war zone. And while I'm sad that your son decided to take his own life or that he died in training, please, I'm going to honor the fact that he decided to serve his country. Okay? But there's that distinction. I'll still grieve with you, but there's that difference. And so I've been working with a Gold Star widow. I love her to death. She lives in Chicago. But we've grown very close to each other. And I love her because we both feel or have the same mindset to that, where we try to help other Gold Stars into their grief and journey, because this is a journey. This is a journey. And, like you said, it's not just a club, it's a journey. This is a journey of grief. A journey that who would have ever thought that I was going to have to take in my life? And this journey is not a straight path. There's no straight path. It's a dang on roller coaster some days. It's curvy. It's got its own rules. It really does. But here was a woman. I'm going to tell you her story real quick. Here's a woman at the outbreak of when we first put boots on the ground. Her husband was over there. He was a Marine. And his tank went missing. I'm on the phone and I'm looking at my son-in-law and I'm like, how does a tank go missing? And they don't know it. He's like, oh.
We had a lot of that. Are you talking about Iraq?
Yeah.
It fell in the river.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. But my mind, I'm listening to
Deborah. It happened a lot more often than you think.
But here's Deborah telling me her story.
Yeah.
And I'm picturing, and I'm like, they're in a convoy and it was nighttime. And here she was to a mother of a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And they come to her door and they tell her that he's missing. Okay. And the next day they come to her door and they do this for 5 days. And she said, don't come back to my door. till you find them. Don't do it.
One way or the other.
Don't come to my door. She's, because she's 8.5 months pregnant. She's stressing. She shouldn't be. She finally sees uniforms coming, and she looked at her mother, and she said, they found him. And, he was fine. They found him. He's fine. And she opened the door, and, of course, they had said, yes, they found the tank upside down in the Euphrates River.
Yep.
All of them inside, having passed. So she, she, as a widow, Gold Star widow, and she actually serves on the Arlington National Board. But here is a woman that's not remarried. She won't remarry. She's raised her 3 children by herself. She had given birth to her child just a week and a half after her husband's funeral. But when you deal with people like that, you just, there's so many Gold Star stories out there that you're just wow. And so Memorial Day is about that. It's not just how they served, it's what they served and why they served. And their death was a result of that service. But I get it. We celebrate the World War II vets that are buried, and yes, and rightfully so, because they served their war. They're gone now. They need to be remembered. Korea needs to be remembered. They all do. Arizona. USS Arizona. Did you hear about what they've done with that? They exhumed 88 bodies out of there. Why? That was their grave. Why now? Right? And that really, there's no family members that they can figure out so far. I guess they're still doing DNA.
DNA, yeah.
But why?
At
That
this
was
point,
a
is it for them or is it for us in our own sense of closure, right?
And if you already don't know that there's family out there, again,
Yeah.
why?
Right.
I mean, we know that there's World War II vets that have chosen to be buried with their buddies down there, and they do that.
And at the Utah, by the way. I've actually been present for one of those.
Oh my. I mean,
Yeah.
but I can get it because that's their grave.
Mm-hmm.
They went through that. Why are you taking them away from that?
Let them rest.
They died heroically.
Mm.
I don't think we can't fathom what they went through that day. I can't.
Mm-mm.
I know.
Well, before we close out here,
Yeah.
if you could give a message to anybody that's dealing with loss, whether it doesn't necessarily have to be a Gold Star family, but somebody that's dealing with loss of a friend, a family, loved one, whoever, what would that message be?
Grief's a journey. It doesn't matter. It's a journey. You're not prepared for it. Nobody is prepared for it. Your mom and dad could live a good, full life. Okay, let's just say his dad, 90 years old, passes away in his sleep. You're not prepared. Nobody is for what it does to your heart, what it does to your insides. Find somebody that knows what it's like to be on that journey. Irregardless, don't ever think that you're on that journey by yourself, because you can't do it alone. It'll consume you. It'll take over you, and not in a good way. I will not use the phrase, because you get it. Your loved one would want you to do that. I can't presume what your loved one would want you to do and not do, except know that it's okay to cry anywhere. I don't care if it's in the milk section
or in the stables.
It doesn't matter. I mean, guys, I got my chickens. He'll tell you, those girls they're my buddies. And I go out there and I tell them about Adam. And I've got 2 that sit in my lap every day. And I swear, they'll listen to my stories about Adam. We were going to go celebrate his enlistment, which was on St. Patrick's Day. And I'm out there and I said, I got to go because we're going to go out and we're going to celebrate Adam enlisted in the Air Force, And I know it sounds crazy, but find some joyful memories. They're out there because you live that life with them. You live that life with them. And nothing touched me more in my life than to hear one man that I knew. He was a World War II vet. He was my daddy's best friend. And he took my hand and he said, "You gave birth to that hero. You gave us that hero." And I never thought about that. I don't think that I did. Yeah, I gave birth to him. I raised him. But those were his decisions. But I supported them. And I could not be, to this day, as much as I miss him. And I do. I wish he was here. I wish I could hear his laugh. And I will purposely look at pictures to see him smile because I can hear him. I can hear him. But he was mine for a little while. And if I got to share him with the world, then I'm more blessed than I could count.
Well, God bless you for your sacrifice, your family's sacrifice, on for what it's worth coming from us. We can't ever thank you enough.
I appreciate that. I do.